Michelle Cox's alarm buzzed at 5 in the morning, cutting through the faint glow of streetlights that filtered past the thin curtains of her modest one-bedroom apartment in Phoenix. With a heavy sigh, she reached over to silence the alarm before it woke her 6-year-old daughter, Sierra, who was curled up at the opposite end of the worn-out couch. They shared that couch on nights when Sierra's fear of sleeping alone took hold, a sign of how close and how precarious their little world could be. Slipping off the couch, Michelle tiptoed across the small living room, careful not to disturb the handful of toys scattered near Sierra's makeshift bed. She rubbed her eyes, hoping for an extra moment of rest that would never come, then gazed at her daughter. Even in half-light, Sierra's golden curls gleamed with a soft halo, and her lips parted in gentle, rhythmic breaths. To Michelle, it was a reminder that no matter how tired or worried she felt, she had a bright reason to keep going. This morning routine had been theirs for as long as Michelle could remember, waking in darkness, hustling to the kitchen, prepping a quick breakfast. She was 32, but felt a decade older. The lines under her brown eyes spoke of long shifts and mounting bills. Her thick, wavy dark hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail to keep it out of her face when the day's work began. She was always in motion, a whirlwind of practicality and determination. In the cramped kitchen, she filled a small pot with water to boil oatmeal. As the stove clicked on, Michelle ran through the day's mental checklist. Pack Sierra's lunch for school, get to her first job at the local cafe by 6:30, make sure she had enough time to pick up Sierra from aftercare before heading to her second shift as a part-time server at a downtown bistro. It was an unrelenting schedule that strained her to the core, but she couldn't afford to slow down. When the oatmeal was nearly done, Sierra wandered into the kitchen, yawning and dragging her small teddy bear by one ear. She wore the same bright pink pajamas she insisted on every night, the fabric now a little faded. Michelle bent down with a warm smile. "Good morning, sweet pea," she said, giving Sierra a gentle hug. "Morning, Mommy," Sierra mumbled, her eyes still half closed. "I'm hungry. There's oatmeal on the stove. I'll top it with some fruit, okay?" Sierra nodded, tugging at the edge of Michelle's worn t-shirt. Despite her tiredness, Michelle always tried to greet Sierra with cheer. To mask the stress, she forced a calm, steady tone. Sierra depended on that calmness like a lifeline. As they sat side by side at the small table, the sun began to peek over the distant mountains, casting amber rays into the apartment. Michelle's phone buzzed, rattling the thin surface of the table. It was an unfamiliar number. She wiped her hands and answered, bracing herself for whatever news might greet her this early. "Miss Cox?" came a woman's brisk voice. "This is Camille from Phoenix Elite Staffing. We have an opening for a wedding event at the Camelback Mountain Resort tomorrow. Short notice, I know, but the tips could be substantial." Michelle's heart skipped a beat. Extra tips were exactly what she needed. As it stood, she was behind on rent and faced a mounting electricity bill, but fear intermingled with her excitement. She knew events like these were physically demanding and came with high expectations. One slip-up could result in losing the opportunity altogether. Even so, she pressed the phone closer to her ear. "How substantial?" Michelle asked, her voice carefully even. "Potentially a few $100s in one evening? Maybe more." "It's a high-profile wedding," Camille replied. "Are you available?" Michelle glanced at Sierra, who was spooning oatmeal into her mouth while humming a little tune. Tomorrow was Saturday, which meant no school for Sierra. Normally, Michelle would leave her daughter with a babysitter on big event days, but as she mentally sifted through babysitting options, she realized none were available on such short notice, especially not on a Saturday. Yet the money was too tempting to refuse. "I'm available," Michelle answered, before she could talk herself out of it. "Please send me the details." After hanging up, Michelle set the phone aside and slowly exhaled. Her mind raced with potential problems. She would have to scramble to find anyone who could watch Sierra for the evening, or maybe she could bring Sierra along as a last resort if she remained safely tucked away backstage. Guilt pricked at Michelle's conscience. She'd never brought Sierra to an event so formal, and the thought of her daughter waiting in a busy hotel kitchen wasn't exactly appealing. But with no other options, Michelle saw a glimmer of hope in this unexpected job offer. "Mommy, are you okay?" Sierra asked, picking up on the change in her mother's expression. Michelle brushed a strand of dark hair behind her ear. "I'm all right, sweet pea. Just got some extra work tomorrow." "It might help us out a lot." Sierra gave a sleepy nod, trusting her mother's judgment. Michelle offered a reassuring smile in return, though inside she felt a swirl of anticipation and anxiety. She reminded herself that this opportunity might be a turning point, a chance to clear some debts and maybe, just maybe, breathe a bit easier. She finished her oatmeal in thoughtful silence, looking out the window at the new day forming. In that moment, Michelle dared to hope that tomorrow's wedding might be the fresh start she and Sierra needed, unaware that it would awaken a chapter of her past she thought was sealed forever. The next morning brought an early wave of desert heat as Michelle hurriedly dressed Sierra for a day with the babysitter. She had 2 hours before her shift at the cafe, and her plan was to drop off Sierra at a friend's place, a friend who owed her a favor. Despite the tension in her stomach, she forced a determined smile while tying Sierra's shoelaces. "If you're good at Kayla's house today, I'll let you choose a treat when I pick you up," she promised. Sierra's eyes brightened, momentarily forgetting the monotony of staying with a sitter yet again. On the drive over, Michelle's phone buzzed. She picked it up at a red light and glanced at the caller ID. It was Kayla. A hollow dread filled her chest. "Hey, Kay," Michelle began, but Kayla's rushed voice cut her off. "Michelle, I am so sorry. My daughter's down with a fever, and I have to take her to urgent care. I can't watch Sierra. I'm really sorry." Michelle clenched the steering wheel, her mind racing for alternatives. "I understand, Kayla. No worries," she managed, though panic laced her tone. She ended the call just as the light turned green. The reality slammed into her. She had no backup plan. All her usual babysitters were either busy or out of town, and she couldn't impose on neighbors she barely knew. She set her jaw, feeling the heavy weight of the decision that had to be made. Within minutes, she pulled up in front of the cafe where she worked her morning shift. She parked and turned around to face Sierra in the back seat. The child was fiddling with her teddy bear, a little brown plush with a missing eye. "Sierra," Michelle began softly, her voice thick with unease, "Mommy has an important job at a fancy wedding tonight. I might need to take you with me." Sierra blinked. "To a wedding? Will there be dancing?" Michelle mustered a small laugh. "Probably, but you can't run around there, sweet pea. You'll have to sit quietly in the kitchen while I work, okay?" The child's face fell for a moment, but she eventually nodded. "I'll be good." "Can I bring my crayons?" "Of course." Relief and guilt washed over Michelle. She hated the idea of dragging her daughter to a chaotic event, but she needed the money, desperately. "All right, let's go inside," she said, stepping out of the car. Inside the cafe's worn brick walls and warm lighting, Michelle slipped into her apron, exchanging quick hellos with her boss and a couple of regulars. The next 4 hours passed in a blur of pouring coffees, refilling pastries, and greeting patrons by name. All the while, her mind kept flashing to the evening ahead. At precisely noon, she clocked out, grabbed Sierra, and headed to a nearby thrift store to see if she could find a plain black skirt or blouse that looked presentable enough for a luxury wedding. The store's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she flipped through the racks, picking out a simple pencil skirt that might pass for formal attire if paired with the right top. She also found a pair of black flats. While Michelle tried on the skirt behind a tattered curtain, Sierra sat on a small bench, swinging her legs. Occasionally, she'd call out, "Mommy, does it fit?" or "Don't forget I'm still here." After settling on an outfit, Michelle made a mental calculation of her remaining cash. It was tight, but at least she now had something more appropriate than her old uniform. She took Sierra's hand and left the store. They arrived home just long enough for Michelle to gather Sierra's crayons, coloring books, and some snacks. She also packed her newly purchased outfit. Sierra helped fold the items neatly, humming a tuneless melody. By late afternoon, they were back in the car, navigating the congested roads toward Camelback Mountain. The closer they got to the resort, the more anxious Michelle became. She'd never served at such a high-end venue before. She glanced at the clock on the dashboard, 4:30 p.m. She was supposed to arrive by 5 for a quick briefing before the wedding began. As they left the city's busy streets, a rugged desert landscape came into view. The famous Camelback Mountain loomed in the distance, bathed in golden sunlight. Michelle could see the elegant resort perched near its base, boasting gleaming windows and manicured grounds, worlds away from her modest corner of Phoenix. Sierra pressed her nose to the window, marveling at the sight. "Wow, Mommy, it looks like a castle." Michelle managed a smile. "It does, doesn't it?" "Just remember, Sweet Pea, we're here so Mommy can work. This is a grown-up party." Sierra nodded solemnly, then resumed gazing at the resort. As Michelle pulled into the parking lot, she couldn't shake the feeling that this job could change things, for better or worse. Her breath caught when she spotted sleek luxury cars lining the valet area. She felt a strange flutter in her chest, a mix of nerves and anticipation, as if some invisible current were pulling her toward a defining moment she couldn't yet name. She parked her old sedan in a far corner, looking for any sign that she was out of her league. But no matter how unprepared she felt, there was no turning back. Grabbing her bag and Sierra's hand, she stepped into the late afternoon heat, telling herself that if she could just get through tonight, maybe she'd finally catch a break. Michelle ushered Sierra into a side entrance reserved for staff, greeted by a flurry of activity from the catering crew, the hum of industrial refrigerators, the scrape of metal trays on countertops, and the swirl of voices reverberated through the kitchen. A quick glance at the clock mounted high on a tile wall told Michelle she was already a few minutes behind schedule. She spotted Gloria Davidson, the head server she'd spoken to briefly on the phone the previous day, bustling near a counter. Gloria was a statuesque woman in her early 50s, her curly silver hair pinned back in a neat chignon. Despite the hurried atmosphere, she radiated a maternal composure. When she noticed Michelle, she offered a nod and a faint smile. "You must be Michelle," Gloria said, adjusting the collar of her crisp white shirt. "We're glad to have you. Let's get you set up quickly. The ceremony starts in an hour, so the pace is going to be intense." Michelle nodded, shifting uncomfortably. "Thank you, Ms. Davidson, and I'm sorry. I had no one to watch my daughter." She gestured to Sierra, who clung to her side, eyes wide with curiosity. Gloria's gaze softened as she bent down to Sierra's level. "You'll be a good helper, right?" Sierra nodded solemnly. "Well, we'll just have to keep you tucked away from the crowd, my dear." Relieved by Gloria's empathy, Michelle led Sierra to a small nook in the back of the kitchen, out of the main traffic flow. She laid out crayons and a coloring book on a wide metal countertop. "Stay right here," Michelle whispered. "I'll check on you whenever I can, okay?" Sierra nodded, her golden curls bouncing. "Okay, Mommy," she replied, already focusing on the pictures in front of her. Michelle fought back a wave of guilt, reminding herself that this was temporary. Gloria handed Michelle a clean apron and pointed to a row of trays stacked with champagne flutes. "We'll be moving these to the service station soon. Then you'll help circulate hors d'oeuvres during cocktail hour, right after the ceremony." Just follow the lead of the more experienced staff if you have any questions. Michelle thanked her, tying the apron around her waist. She inhaled to steady her nerves, then began meticulously aligning champagne flutes on silver trays. The repetitive motion gave her mind a momentary reprieve, yet a flicker of unease danced at the back of her thoughts. Each time she glanced toward Sierra, she felt a desperate hope that nothing would go wrong. As she continued her task, Michelle couldn't help noticing how luxurious everything was. The kitchen alone was larger than her entire apartment. She glimpsed line cooks plating intricate appetizers, exotic flowers waiting to be set out, and staff rushing with pressed tablecloths. She felt like she'd wandered into a movie set depicting a life so distant from her own. At one point, she overheard two servers discussing the Westbrook family. "Rumor has it the groom's parents are stuck in London," one said, "but they're pulling out all the stops for this wedding anyway." "Sure are," the other replied. "Word is the bride's from some fancy family with old money. This is more than just a wedding. It's practically a society event." Michelle's ears perked up at the name Westbrook, though it meant nothing to her yet. She shrugged it off, too preoccupied with ensuring that Sierra stayed put. She finished lining the glasses, then turned to see a worried frown on Sierra's face. "Mommy," Sierra whispered, beckoning her closer. "It's kinda loud in here, and hot." Michelle crouched beside her, placing a reassuring hand on Sierra's knee. "I know, baby. It's just for a little while." She noticed the flush creeping up Sierra's cheeks. "Let me see if I can find a quieter corner." Before she could move, a sudden memory flashed in Michelle's mind, unbidden and unsettling. She recalled a time 6 years ago when she had felt similarly out of place. Her thoughts swirled around a man whose name she refused to utter for so long, a man who had seemingly disappeared from her life the moment she realized she was pregnant. But she shook the memory away, forcing herself back into the present. She had a job to do. Gloria's voice cut through the buzz of the kitchen. "Michelle, can you come here? We have a station set up just outside these doors." She pointed to a pair of swinging doors leading to the lavish event space. "Your primary duty will be to serve the bride's side of the family during cocktail hour. After the ceremony, of course." Michelle gulped. She cast one last glance at Sierra, who offered her mother a brave smile. Then she squared her shoulders, reminding herself that she was here for one reason, to provide a better life for her daughter. Little did she know how soon her past would collide with her present, unraveling secrets she believed were long buried. 15 minutes before the ceremony, Michelle slipped through the swinging doors into the main hall. The transition from the bustling kitchen to the opulent ballroom was jarring. Soft classical music emanated from a small orchestra in the corner, and rows of chairs faced a floral archway where the bride and groom would soon exchange vows. Tall windows showcased the silhouette of Camelback Mountain, now glowing with the fiery hues of late afternoon sun. Michelle's breath caught at the spectacle. Crystal chandeliers refracted light across the polished marble floor, and the floral arrangements, white lilies, pastel roses, and delicate greenery, looked like they'd been flown in from a fairy tale. She passed a mirrored wall, catching a glimpse of her reflection. Dark hair secured in a low bun, plain black uniform, a hint of tension in her eyes. She felt distinctly out of place, like an actor wandering on stage in the wrong play. She refocused on setting up a small service station near the back of the room. A silver tray filled with champagne flutes rested at her side, ready to be handed out after the vows. Nearby, a violinist tuned her instrument, filling the air with stray notes. Michelle tried not to fidget or let her nerves show, but she was keenly aware that failure wasn't an option. The last thing she needed was to spill champagne on a guest, or, worse, cross paths with someone she might know. A tap on her shoulder startled her. She turned to see Tiffany, another server with kind brown eyes and curly auburn hair pulled into a neat ponytail. Tiffany appeared to be in her late 20s, her face open and friendly. "Michelle, right?" Tiffany asked with a sympathetic smile. "Gloria asked me to give you a quick rundown. You'll help me pass out drinks after the ceremony, then we'll move to the reception area outside for hors d'oeuvres." Michelle nodded, relieved by the friendly approach. "Thanks. I appreciate the help." Tiffany's smile widened. "I've been doing weddings for a while. Best advice: keep a low profile, smile politely, and remember that these big families usually have drama. We just stay out of it." They shared a quiet chuckle before Tiffany excused herself to continue setting up near the main aisle. Michelle felt a small sense of camaraderie. Even though they had just met, it was comforting to know she wasn't alone in finding this environment intimidating. As guests started trickling into the room, Michelle positioned herself at her station, mentally reviewing her tasks. She caught snippets of conversation as elegantly dressed men and women passed by, discussions about private jets, philanthropic galas, and real estate ventures, words that echoed a world far removed from her own. She forced a neutral expression, focusing on being invisible unless called upon. In the midst of the slow procession, a tall man in a tailored suit walked by with a graceful blonde woman on his arm. The woman's posture was regal, her expression slightly haughty, and she surveyed the room with the air of someone used to commanding attention. Michelle guessed she might be related to the bride, given her expensive attire and the subtle nods she received from other guests. A few steps behind them came an older gentleman, holding what appeared to be a wedding program with the name Westbrook printed in elegant calligraphy. The name barely registered in Michelle's mind until he spoke. "I can't believe Joseph's father and mother are missing this," he muttered to a companion. "But you know the Westbrook clan, always business first." Michelle's chest tightened, an inexplicable pang echoing in her heart. She ignored the feeling, attributing it to nerves. After all, Westbrook was just a name. She had no reason to dwell on it. As the final guests took their seats, the bride's party gathered at the entrance. Whispered excitement spread through the hall when the music shifted to the first notes of the processional. Michelle watched from her discreet spot, her eyes scanning the crowd. She caught sight of Tiffany, who signaled for her to be ready with the champagne tray. Then the bride stepped forward, a vision in white lace with a delicate veil trailing behind her. The guests rose from their seats, cameras flashed, and the soft rustle of silk underscored the hush. Michelle glanced around for the groom, but he was standing at the front, his face partially obscured by a tall groomsman. She only noted his imposing height and the confident set of his shoulders as he waited. Michelle tried to focus on her role, but a sense of uneasy expectation tugged at her. Something about the whole scene felt charged, as though a tension lay just beneath the gilded surface. Yet she couldn't pinpoint why. All she knew was that her stomach churned with an anxiety she couldn't quite name. A mixture of worry for Sierra left in the kitchen and a vague foreboding that she was on the precipice of something life-altering. When the bride reached the altar, Michelle saw the groom clearly for the first time, at least from the side. He looked older than she'd initially assumed, maybe late 30s, with a chiseled jaw and slicked-back hair. She couldn't see much else, but there was an air of authority about him that seemed to fill the space. Brushing off her unease, Michelle turned her attention to the music. Soon enough, her job would be to offer champagne after the I-dos. She planned to do just that, then retreat to the kitchen, check on Sierra, and try to make it through this evening unscathed. Yet the unsettling flutter in her chest warned her that fate might have a different plan. The ceremony proceeded with all the grandeur one might expect. Soft violins and cellos accompanied the vows, and the officiant delivered a polished speech about unity, family, and enduring love. Michelle stood at a distance, holding the tray of champagne flutes, her gaze flickering occasionally toward the entrance to ensure Sierra wasn't wandering around. The last thing Michelle needed was for her daughter to tumble into the aisle mid-vows. As the couple exchanged rings, a hush fell over the room, broken only by the bride's quiet affirmation and the groom's firm response. Then came the moment for everyone to applaud, and the newlyweds, Clarissa and Joseph, Michelle finally heard someone whisper, turned to face the gathered guests. Michelle held her breath. Even from her vantage point, she could see the tension behind Clarissa's bright smile, as though the corners of her lips were forced upwards but never reached her eyes. Joseph gave a polite, almost detached grin, one that didn't quite mask a trace of unease. As the guests stood and began milling about, Michelle and Tiffany smoothly stepped forward to offer champagne. Michelle's heart pounded at the thought of weaving through such an affluent crowd, but her service training kicked in. She pasted on her best pleasant expression and offered glasses with graceful efficiency, avoiding prolonged eye contact. "Congratulations," Michelle murmured to a passing guest who took a flute. In return, she received a polite nod and a quick glance that dismissed her as another anonymous staff member. She exhaled, relieved that her role didn't require conversation beyond small pleasantries, but a sudden pang shot through her. Sierra. She had to get back to the kitchen soon to check on her daughter. Carefully maneuvering around a cluster of elegantly dressed women, she caught a glimpse of Joseph Westbrook speaking with a few guests near the altar. Even in profile, she noticed something in his stance, an undercurrent of restlessness, maybe. But she told herself it was none of her concern. Just then, Tiffany sidled up beside her. "We're almost done here," Tiffany said in a hushed tone. "The wedding planner wants us to move everyone outside for the reception. Once you've circulated the tray, you can slip away for a minute to check on your little one." Michelle nodded gratefully and continued distributing the champagne. She had just enough glasses for the remaining guests who seemed interested, which included a few more folks engaged in hushed conversations. Finally, the tray was empty. She left it on a nearby table with a discreet sigh of relief. Head down, Michelle made her way back to the swinging doors leading into the kitchen. Her heart pounded with the nervous energy of someone about to check a vital lifeline. She pushed through the doors, scanning the kitchen for Sierra. The bustle was slightly calmer now, with staff taking a brief moment to reorganize for the reception. Pots and pans clanged in the background, and the air was thick with the aroma of roasted meats and herbed vegetables. She spotted Sierra tucked in the corner next to a towering stack of plates, crayons scattered around her on the stainless steel countertop. Sierra looked up, visibly relieved to see her mother. "Mommy," she whispered urgently. "I was so good, I didn't move at all." Michelle leaned down to kiss Sierra's cheek. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'm proud of you." Sierra's eyes shone with a mix of boredom and loyalty, and Michelle felt a rush of warmth and guilt. She hated leaving her daughter in such a hectic environment, but there was no alternative. Before Michelle could say another word, a stern voice behind her made her jump. She turned to see a tall, elegantly dressed woman, Clarissa, the bride, standing with an air of cold authority. Even in the artificial glare of the kitchen's fluorescent lights, Clarissa's white gown looked immaculate, and her face showed more irritation than bridal glow. "Is there a child in the kitchen?" Clarissa asked, her tone clipped. Her arms folded across her chest, the glittering diamond bracelet on her wrist catching the light. Michelle felt her stomach twist into a knot. She tried to steady her voice. I'm so sorry. The babysitter cancelled at the last minute. I had no choice but to bring her." Clarissa's eyes narrowed as she looked at Sierra. The bride's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "Keep her out of the main event space. My guests didn't pay for a circus performance." She spun on her heels, the fabric of her gown swishing behind her as she disappeared back through the doors. Michelle swallowed hard, fighting the burning sensation in her eyes that threatened tears. She crouched next to Sierra, forcing a smile for her daughter's sake. "It's okay, sweet pea. I'm here." Sierra nodded, looking worried. "That lady didn't seem nice," she said, her voice barely audible over the clatter of dishes. Michelle gave Sierra a gentle squeeze. "She's just stressed," she whispered, trying to rationalize the bride's behavior, though she found it difficult to justify such rudeness. "Stay put a little while longer, okay?" Sierra nodded bravely, hugging her teddy bear close. Michelle hurried back into the fray, determined to avoid any further confrontation with Clarissa. As she re-entered the ballroom, she caught sight of Joseph Westbrook again, now standing alone near a massive floral arrangement. Even from across the room, she sensed a tension radiating from him. She tried to ignore it, but a flicker of strange curiosity tugged at her. She glanced at the clock on a side wall. The reception would begin soon, and the open-air terrace was set up with buffet stations and cocktail tables. Michelle steeled herself for the next round of work, wishing only to finish the job without any more trouble. Deep down, she couldn't shake an odd premonition that the carefully woven threads of her past and present were about to collide in a way she never could have anticipated. She straightened her posture, inhaled a calming breath, and pushed aside her apprehension. Right now, all that mattered was earning the generous tip she'd been promised. Whatever uneasy currents flowed beneath this grand event, Michelle vowed to ride them out, unaware of just how swiftly those undercurrents would drag her into a whirlwind of revelations. Michelle slipped into the resort's vast hallway once the brief lull between the ceremony and the reception allowed it. The hallway's polished floors and hushed lighting provided a temporary refuge from the buzz of the ballroom. She was about to hurry back to the kitchen to check on Sierra again when Gloria Davidson emerged from a side corridor, a walkie-talkie in hand. Gloria's expression immediately softened when she spotted Michelle. "There you are," Gloria said, her tone a gentle blend of authority and concern. "How's your daughter doing?" Michelle exhaled, tension sagging from her shoulders. "She's holding up. I'm trying to keep her out of sight." "I don't want to cause any more trouble with the bride," Gloria nodded, the silver curls in her chignon glinting under the overhead lights. "Listen, these high society weddings can be tense. People get wrapped up in the spectacle. Don't let that rattle you." Michelle forced a small, polite smile. "I appreciate that, Ms. Davidson. I'm just trying to do my job without making waves." Gloria gestured for Michelle to follow her down the hallway. They passed an ornate mirror framed with gold leaf, reflecting the two of them, one older, composed and sure-footed, the other younger and bracing for whatever obstacle might appear next. Gloria led them to a small alcove away from the main foot traffic. A faint floral scent from the nearby arrangements filled the air. With a kind yet penetrating gaze, Gloria said, "You're doing fine. You have a calm energy about you. But I can tell something is weighing on your mind beyond just this wedding." Michelle swallowed, her mouth suddenly dry. She'd only known Gloria a day, but there was a warmth in the older woman's voice that made it easy to confide. Still, Michelle hesitated, uncertain how much she should reveal. "It's complicated," she finally managed. "I've been on my own for a while, trying to keep everything afloat." Gloria reached out and gently rested a hand on Michelle's arm. "I know that story better than you might think. I raised 2 boys on my own after my divorce, kept 2 jobs at times, 3 when I had to. That kind of life can wear you down." She gave a soft smile. "But it can also make you stronger than you ever realized." Michelle's eyes flickered with a hint of relief. "It's nice to know I'm not alone," she murmured. Gloria's walkie-talkie crackled then, and a static-laced voice summoned her back to the ballroom. She glanced at Michelle apologetically. "We need to prep the cocktail area outside, then coordinate with the kitchen for the buffet. You'll be assigned to the receiving line for a bit." Michelle felt her nerves flare up again. A receiving line? With the bride and groom? Yes. Gloria noted Michelle's anxious expression. "Just greet the guests, offer them champagne, and keep your composure. The wedding planner wants a uniform presence. No mistakes." Michelle forced a swallow. The idea of hovering near Clarissa after their encounter in the kitchen made her palms sweat. "I'll do my best." "That's all anyone can ask." Gloria gave Michelle a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "And if you need me, just signal. I'm never far." They walked together back toward the kitchen entrance. As soon as they stepped through the double doors, the rush of activity hit them. Waitstaff hurried in and out, ferrying trays of hors d'oeuvres. Heat from open ovens spilled across the tiles. The steady clank of pots, pans, and ladles threatened to drown out conversation. Michelle caught sight of Sierra in the corner, her head bent over a coloring page. She appeared content for the moment, but Michelle could see the fatigue in the slight droop of her shoulders. Gloria headed off to manage her team. Michelle quickly knelt beside Sierra, brushing a hand over the girl's soft curls. "Honey, I'm going to be working in the next room. Are you okay here?" Sierra nodded, though she wore a patient but strained little smile. "I'm okay, Mummy." Michelle's chest tightened. She felt a pang of guilt. "I'll come back as soon as I can," she promised, pressing a kiss to Sierra's forehead. A young line cook named Jonah, who'd been slicing vegetables at a nearby station, caught Michelle's eye. With a friendly smile, he offered, "I'll keep an eye on her, Mum. I got a niece about the same age. Don't worry." Michelle exhaled, gratitude evident in her posture. "Thank you," she said softly. Leaving Sierra under Jonah's watchful eye, Michelle slipped out again. In the hallway, she paused to smooth her hair and steady her breath. She reminded herself of Gloria's words that single mothers, or anyone weathering life's pressures alone, could be stronger than they realized. Perhaps that quiet strength would sustain her through the remainder of this day. The job had to be done, and if she could do it well, maybe the lucrative tip would be enough to buy her a small reprieve, enough to pay the rent, maybe fix the sputtering old car, and provide Sierra with something a little closer to normalcy. She continued down the corridor, preparing to face the elegantly dressed crowd once more, even though a knot of anxiety twisted in her gut at the thought of standing near Clarissa. She clung to Gloria's confident example. Underneath the starched apron and careful smile, Michelle felt a glimmer of determination. She would do her part, keep her daughter safe, and push through any obstacles. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself a tiny spark of hope that, perhaps, things wouldn't always be this hard. Michelle found herself stationed at the threshold of an elegantly draped tent on the resort's grand terrace. The sun had dipped low over Camelback Mountain, painting the sky in purple and orange hues. Fairy lights and lanterns lined the perimeter, giving the scene a dreamy glow. Guests trickled outside, chatting animatedly, glasses of wine in hand. Despite the breathtaking setting, Michelle felt her pulse quicken. The wedding planner, a brisk, no-nonsense woman in a sleek black jumpsuit, had ordered all available staff to line the entry to the reception area. The moment the newlyweds finished their indoor photo session, they would enter with grand fanfare, greeting their friends and family. Each server was expected to perform with flawless courtesy. In many ways, this was the point of no return, a symbolic departure from her usual routine. Normally, Michelle's shifts were in modest cafes or bistros. She was unused to the demands of an event where perfection was the baseline, and she had never needed to bring Sierra, compounding her tension. As she adjusted a tray of sparkling water glasses, Tiffany sidled up, wearing the same black and white uniform. "How are you holding up?" she whispered, glancing at the expression on Michelle's face. Michelle gave a tense shrug. "I keep thinking about Sierra. She's all alone in that kitchen, minus the helpful staff. I wish I could check on her." Tiffany placed a comforting hand on Michelle's elbow. "She's okay. The kitchen's full of decent people, and Jonah said he'd look out for her, right? You'll be able to pop in soon." Michelle nodded, exhaling slowly. "Right!" A sudden burst of fanfare music signaled that the bride and groom were making their grand entrance. Michelle squared her shoulders. As Clarissa and Joseph emerged from indoors, a small group of guests gathered on either side, forming an impromptu aisle. Cell phones flashed, capturing the couple gliding under the shimmering lights. Observing them from a few steps away, Michelle's stomach tightened. Clarissa looked radiant in her sleek white gown, though her smile appeared brittle at the edges. Joseph, imposing in his tailored tux, carried himself with a mix of composure and restlessness. Michelle couldn't quite pin down why he seemed uneasy, but the subtle tension in his jawline and shoulders betrayed more than simple wedding nerves. The wedding planner motioned for Michelle and Tiffany to move forward and offer water and champagne to the bride and groom. Tiffany took a step forward, presenting a tray with fresh glasses. Michelle mirrored her partner's actions, trying not to lock eyes with Clarissa. She was still stung by that curt encounter in the kitchen, but Clarissa only gave her a cursory glance this time. Too occupied by the throng of congratulatory guests, Joseph's gaze, however, flickered toward Michelle with an odd, fleeting curiosity, as though something about her uniformed figure caught his attention. He furrowed his brow, almost imperceptibly, before turning back to accept a glass from Tiffany. Michelle's heart thumped, a strange ripple of apprehension traveling through her. She told herself she was being paranoid. He was probably just looking at the service station behind her. When the couple drifted further onto the terrace, the rest of the guests followed, forming clusters around high-top tables. Soft music from a live saxophonist filled the air, and waiters circulated with hors d'oeuvres. Michelle seized her chance to slip out of the limelight, retreating from the central aisle. She made her way back into the resort, intending to check on Sierra. The air in the hallway was cooler, quieter. As she walked, she tried to shake the persistent feeling that Joseph Westbrook's fleeting glance had meant something. It was ludicrous. He was just another wealthy patron, and she was a server. Yet the way his eyes lingered for that split second had stirred a potent mix of uncertainty inside her. In the kitchen, she found Sierra exactly where she'd left her, though she now sat atop a tall stool, looking at a children's book she'd fished from Michelle's tote bag. Jonah, slicing tomatoes behind a nearby station, gave Michelle a nod. "She's been good as gold," he said. "No trouble at all." Michelle smiled at Sierra. "Hi, baby. Everything okay?" Sierra nodded. "I'm a little hungry." She held up her teddy bear. "Can we have a snack?" Relief washed over Michelle. Her child was safe and calm. "Let's see what I can get you," she said, moving to the end of the prep counter where leftover bread rolls and fruit slices had been set aside. She quickly assembled a small plate. As Sierra munched on an apple slice, Michelle realized this was her world now, caught between the demands of an elite event and her duty as a mother. She couldn't simply walk away. She needed the money too badly. In that sense, she'd crossed a threshold. Whatever happened next, she would have to face it head-on, balancing the fragile line between providing for Sierra and keeping them both from being swept up in the drama unfolding around the Westbrook wedding. She checked her watch and saw it was time to return to the reception. As she gave Sierra a reassuring nod and headed back out, a part of her recognized that stepping into this lavish domain was more than just another shift. It was a journey into a place where old secrets and new responsibilities intertwined, and where she would have no choice but to confront them, no matter how much she wanted to keep her distance. The evening air on the terrace was balmy by the time Michelle returned, tray in hand, to circulate among the guests. Twinkling string lights wove through the resort's palm trees, and the sense of opulence was nearly intoxicating. Soft jazz music drifted from a small stage where a trio played, their melodies mingling with the clink of glasses and low hum of conversation. Michelle felt like she had crossed into a realm far removed from her usual life of cramped apartments and second-hand furniture. She maneuvered carefully between guests, dressed in sleek designer gowns and tailored suits, offering them flutes of champagne from her tray. It was a new world, a special world, as she had once heard a friend describe stepping into luxury hospitality. The problem was that Michelle felt like an extra in someone else's grand production, tasked with blending into the background. Occasionally, she paused to eavesdrop on bits of conversation. One group discussed a recent investment in downtown Phoenix real estate. Another argued about the best private schools in the region. She heard the words Westbrook portfolio more than once, and realized that Joseph Westbrook must be at the center of significant business dealings. The more she learned, the more distant and intimidating he seemed, yet an inexplicable tug within her refused to let these details slide into irrelevance. At one point, she noticed Tiffany chatting with an older couple near a tall heat lamp, presumably answering questions about the menu. Michelle took the opportunity to slip back inside for a moment to catch her breath. The constant swirl of people made her uneasy, as if each step could risk revealing some hidden truth she was desperate to keep buried. She found a quiet hallway off to the side of the terrace, lined with framed photos of the resort in decades past. Black and white snapshots of hikers on Camelback Mountain and vintage automobiles parked out front. Michelle leaned against the wall, trying to calm the erratic beat of her heart. She told herself she was just tired, that she needed a short break before returning to the crowd. A hand gently touched her shoulder, and she spun around to see Gloria. Her mentor's expression held a note of concern. "You all right?" Gloria asked softly. Michelle managed a small nod. "I just needed a minute. It's a lot out there." Gloria glanced at the photos on the wall, then back to Michelle. "Big weddings are always overwhelming. But you've handled yourself well so far." A subtle smile tugged at her lips. "I remember my first high society event. Thought I'd pass out from nerves before the dessert course." Michelle offered a faint chuckle. "I guess I just feel out of place, and I'm worried about Sierra." "She's fine in the kitchen," Gloria assured. "But this is tough, no doubt. Try not to let the scale of it all knock you off balance. Once you figure out the unspoken rules of these events, it gets easier." Michelle took a steadying breath. "Thanks. It helps to know I'm not the only one who's ever felt like this." With a squeeze of Michelle's shoulder, Gloria motioned for them to return to the terrace. Taking a deep inhale, Michelle stepped outside once more. The music had shifted to a livelier tune, and many guests now danced on a makeshift parquet floor near the stage. Joseph Westbrook and Clarissa stood at the periphery, greeting friends who approached to congratulate them. Clarissa's expression had grown tight, as though her patience were wearing thin, while Joseph alternated between polite small talk and glancing around the terrace like he was searching for something. Michelle resumed her role, making her way through the throng with fresh trays of canapés, miniature quiches, bacon-wrapped figs, delicate pastry shells. She stayed alert for any sign that Clarissa might corner her again, or that Joseph might glance her way. Although she doubted he'd recognize her, the possibility lingered in the back of her mind. Half an hour later, the band announced the couple's first dance. Guests gathered around the dance floor, cameras and phones at the ready. Michelle found herself near the back of the crowd, close enough to see Joseph's gaze flicker over the assembly as if restless. Clarissa slipped her arms around his shoulders, and they began a slow waltz. Michelle felt an odd pang watching them, a swirl of sympathy and wariness. It was clear that Clarissa was trying to smile for the cameras, but her expression seemed forced, lacking the warmth one might expect from a radiant bride. As the dance progressed, Michelle's thoughts turned to Sierra. With each swirl of the newlyweds, Michelle grew anxious to check on her daughter again. But the staff was under strict orders to stay in place until after the dance concluded. She tried to focus on the task at hand, but her mind kept drifting to that cramped corner of the kitchen. She envisioned Sierra's small face, possibly bored or frightened, and the familiar ache of guilt knotted her stomach. She scanned the edges of the crowd, seeking Tiffany or Gloria, hoping one of them might relieve her. Instead, she locked eyes, just for a heartbeat, with Joseph. He turned his head at exactly the wrong moment, and their gazes connected across the swirl of dancing figures. A spark of confusion crossed his features. Then the moment was lost as he turned to avoid stepping on Clarissa's train. Michelle's tray wobbled precariously in her grasp. She bit her lip, trying to dismiss the sudden tremor in her hand. It was just a glance, she told herself. He likely saw only a server out of place. Still, the encounter left her unsettled, as though she'd brushed up against a past that refused to stay buried. Closing her eyes for a brief moment, she reminded herself that no matter how lavish or strange this world felt, she had to keep it together, for Sierra's sake, and for her own. When the first dance ended, guests erupted into applause, and the band invited others onto the floor. The lively notes of a jazz standard filled the air, coaxing laughter and conversation. Michelle took the chance to quietly slip away from her station and head back to the kitchen, determined to check on Sierra. Inside, the pace had slowed a bit as most of the guests were now enjoying the music and entertainment outside. Sierra was perched on the same stool, flipping through her coloring book. She broke into a grin upon seeing her mother. "Mommy, I'm almost done with this picture," Sierra announced, holding up a page with a rainbow-colored pony. Michelle felt a wave of relief. "Looks beautiful. Sweet pea. Do you need anything? Water? Another snack?" Sierra shook her head. "I'm okay." Her voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "The nice cook gave me a piece of chocolate cake earlier. He said it was just a small leftover slice." A laugh escaped Michelle, bright and genuine, relieving the tension that coiled inside her. Well, that was nice of him. She brushed a wisp of golden hair away from Sierra's forehead. "I have to go back out there soon. If you need me, ask Jonah or any of the other staff to find me, okay?" Sierra nodded. "I will." Michelle was about to return when she spotted a tray of fresh hors d'oeuvres being prepped. Gloria stood at the counter, double-checking the plating. Michelle walked over, feeling a touch of gratitude for her mentor's steady presence. "Thanks for checking in on your little one," Gloria said, handing Michelle a tray of bite-sized bruschetta. "I can bring you up to speed on the next shift changes. We'll need a few servers rotating at the bar and others focusing on dessert service shortly." Michelle nodded, taking the tray carefully. "All right, whatever you need me to do, I'm in." Gloria offered a small wink. "That's the spirit." Back on the terrace, Michelle noticed that the dance floor was busy. Joseph and Clarissa had long since left center stage, each chatting with separate clusters of guests. Michelle lingered by the tall potted palms, distributing bruschetta to anyone who caught her eye. In the swirl of color and movement, she felt almost invisible, and that was exactly what she wanted. Yet in her state of near invisibility, she observed plenty. She noticed how Joseph would laugh politely at jokes, but then glance away, scanning the terrace as if searching for something more meaningful. She also took in Clarissa's interactions, all surface-level charm, but with a hint of exasperation whenever the conversation drifted to family. Michelle overheard a snippet where Clarissa mentioned the absence of Joseph's parents, her tone teetering between frustration and embarrassment. At one point, Michelle passed by a cluster of elegantly dressed women near the bar. She heard them discussing the Westbrook estate, some rumor about Joseph's father's controlling ways, and how the groom had established his own real estate ventures just to break free from the family's stronghold. Michelle tried not to linger, but the information piqued her curiosity. Suddenly, one of the older women in the group turned toward Michelle, snapping her fingers. "Dear, can you bring us a fresh bottle of the Cabernet?" she demanded. "These glasses won't refill themselves." Michelle masked her annoyance with a professional smile. "Right away, ma'am." She headed toward the bar, where the bartender, a lean man with a friendly grin, was pouring drinks non-stop. He handed her an unopened bottle when she gave him the table number. As she left, she felt another pair of eyes on her. Stealing a glance, she saw Joseph Westbrook standing a few yards away, arms folded. His intense, thoughtful gaze rested on her for a moment longer than mere coincidence would allow. Michelle's stomach flipped and her throat went dry. She forced herself to continue walking, careful not to let her expression betray the turmoil inside her. After delivering the wine, she found a less crowded corner near the band's setup and paused, trying to steady her breathing. Her mind whirled with questions. Had Joseph recognized her from somewhere? Was it just her imagination? She reminded herself that the last time she saw him, if indeed it was him, had been nearly 7 years ago, and their encounter had been fleeting. She had no proof that the man who once charmed her all those years ago was the very same Joseph Westbrook standing a short distance away. Still, a faint spark of hope and dread ignited within her, mingling with the swirl of evening air scented by citrus and jasmine. She hated that she couldn't quell the rising tide of emotion. Part of her wanted to vanish among the throng of anonymous waitstaff, while another part yearned for clarity, an answer to the questions she'd asked herself for so long. A sudden hush spread across the terrace as the band finished a song, replaced by scattered applause. Michelle jolted from her thoughts. She realized it would be best to bury these doubts, at least for tonight. She had a daughter to think about and a job to do. Determined to keep her head down, she moved back into the crowd, tray held high, telling herself that nothing more was going on than the typical flurry of a lavish wedding reception. A little later, Michelle headed toward the lounge area set up near a row of elegant cabanas overlooking a moonlit swimming pool. Soft, ambient lighting illuminated clusters of expensive couches draped in white fabric. The gentle murmur of water from an ornate fountain added a soothing backdrop to the lively chatter. Balancing a tray of fruit tarts, Michelle saw Tiffany wave her over from one of the couches. Tiffany was chatting with Kyle, a tall bartender who sported slicked-back dark hair and a quick smile. Both wore matching black uniforms. As Michelle approached, Tiffany greeted her with an eager wave. "We were just talking about grabbing a cup of coffee once the dance floor calms down," Tiffany said brightly. "You want in?" Michelle hesitated, but the warmth in their faces made her smile. She set down her tray on a side table and responded in a hushed voice. "A quick break wouldn't hurt. I could use the caffeine." Kyle took a seat on the edge of a plush ottoman. "We've been running around non-stop. I've seen some crazy weddings, but this one's something else. Tension's thick enough to slice with a cake knife." Tiffany nodded, her ponytail swaying. "The families keep throwing sideways glances at each other. I overheard some Westbrook relatives muttering about how Joseph's father disapproves of everything, including the bride." Michelle felt a tug of curiosity, but tried to remain nonchalant. "High-end families usually have complicated dynamics." "Tell me about it," Kyle said, rolling his eyes. "Once, I worked a wedding where the bride's family stormed out before dinner. Let's hope this one doesn't go that far." They shared a small laugh. Then Tiffany noticed the pensive look on Michelle's face. "How's your daughter holding up?" she asked gently. Michelle's shoulders relaxed at the kind inquiry. "She's a trooper," she replied. "I check on her every chance I get. Jonah's been a godsend, keeping her occupied. I just hope she doesn't get too restless." Tiffany nodded, an empathetic glimmer in her eyes. "I'm a single mom too. My son's with my sister tonight. So I get it, juggling everything." Gratefulness sparked in Michelle's chest. "It helps to meet others who understand," she said softly. "Sometimes I feel guilty for bringing her, but I had no choice." Kyle offered a reassuring shrug. "People do what they have to do. And to be honest, most guests won't even notice, as long as everything runs smoothly." He tossed a glance toward the far side of the lounge, where a few men in expensive suits were engaged in animated conversation. "Still, keep a low profile. Some of these folks can be prickly." Tiffany smirked. "Prickly is polite. Try downright cold." At that moment, Jonah ambled by, apparently on a short break. He raised a hand in greeting. "Hey, you three. Everything okay? Kitchen's a bit calmer, but be ready for dessert service soon." Michelle felt a surge of relief at seeing him. "Thanks for keeping an eye on Sierra. I really appreciate it." Jonah waved off her gratitude. "She's no trouble at all. She was drawing pictures of horses and telling me about her favorite cartoon." His face lit with a friendly grin. "Honestly, she's a sweet kid." The conversation was cut short when Gloria's walkie-talkie crackled near the bar, summoning servers to prepare for a final pass of appetizers before the cake-cutting ceremony. Michelle exchanged quick goodbyes with Tiffany, Kyle, and Jonah, feeling a touch lighter. She might be out of her element, but she wasn't alone. She had found allies in her fellow staff, people who understood the demands of hospitality work and the complexities of life outside these glamorous events. Returning to the main terrace, Michelle once again weaved among clusters of guests. The mood had shifted slightly. A few intoxicated partygoers laughed too loudly, while others appeared to be huddled in more serious discussions. She paused at a table where two elderly women complimented the hors d'oeuvres. One of them patted Michelle's hand in gratitude, praising the server team for their hard work. It was a small kindness, but it filled Michelle with a bit more confidence. Still, that subtle undercurrent of tension remained. Every now and then, she would see Joseph Westbrook drifting away from a conversation, scanning the crowd as if seeking an escape. Clarissa, on the other hand, seemed to relish the attention from certain guests, though her smile failed to reach her eyes whenever Joseph stepped away. Michelle tried not to dwell on them, but her mind occasionally circled back to the flicker of recognition she thought she'd seen in Joseph's face. She told herself it was mere coincidence, an overactive imagination fueled by exhaustion and the stress of keeping Sierra hidden away. Yet every time she spotted him, her pulse quickened. She turned her focus to distributing the last round of appetizers, reminding herself that soon dessert would be served, the cake would be cut, and the formalities would begin winding down. If everything went smoothly, she and Sierra could be on their way home before midnight, a respectable tip in hand. For now, she clung to that hope as she navigated through clusters of guests, buoyed by the simple fact that she wasn't tackling this surreal world alone. An hour later, the wedding cake, a towering 5-tier confection adorned with pale pink roses, was wheeled into the center of the terrace. The air buzzed with anticipation as phones and cameras were aimed at the couple. Joseph and Clarissa stood in the spotlight, knives in hand, poised to cut the ceremonial first slice. Michelle hovered on the perimeter, holding a tray of coffee cups for anyone who might want a warm beverage with dessert. She noticed the bride's rigid posture as the cameras flashed. Clarissa wore a fixed grin, but it looked strained, as though she was performing a task she no longer enjoyed. Joseph guided Clarissa's hand over the knife, their fingers entwined. But Michelle detected a stiffness in his motions, too. They looked every bit the elegant couple, But it was a fragile facade. After the initial slice, servers appeared with plates of cake for the guests. Michelle swapped her coffee tray for a stack of dessert plates. She circled from table to table, offering a slice to anyone who motioned her over. Meanwhile, Tiffany and Kyle managed a separate table with additional sweets, exchanging tired smiles and silent coordination with Michelle in the choreographed dance of experienced servers. As Michelle neared the far corner of the terrace, she saw a cluster of older men in suits, all appearing quite serious. One of them was speaking in low, agitated tones. "I'm telling you, Westbrook's father's refusal to attend has raised questions. Investors are spooked. If Joseph can't smooth things over, the entire venture could be at risk." She tried not to listen, but it was impossible to ignore. Another man responded, "The bride's family is no small factor. They might be wealthy, but they don't have the local connections to help us." Michelle paused behind a decorative pillar, waiting for a moment to slip past unobtrusively. Suddenly, she heard a sharper voice join the fray. "Gentlemen, perhaps we should save business for another time." Peering around the pillar, Michelle recognized Joseph Westbrook. His brow creased with frustration. "Let's not turn my wedding into a hostile takeover meeting." One of the older men, who must have been in his 60s, adjusted his tie. "Apologies, Joseph, but you know we're all concerned about—" "I know," Joseph cut in, his voice subdued but firm. "But not tonight." Michelle felt a rush of empathy for him. From the snippets she'd overheard, it seemed Joseph was balancing not just family drama, but also business pressures. She quickly resumed her path, distributing dessert plates to a nearby table. When she glanced back, she saw Joseph slip away, jaw clenched, shoulders rigid. He exchanged a few polite words with a passing guest, then continued walking, heading toward the quieter end of the terrace. Michelle started to turn away, thinking it best to mind her own business, when a streak of movement drew her eye. It was Clarissa, stepping into Joseph's path. She held up her bridal skirt, her eyes sharp. Michelle couldn't make out what Clarissa was saying, but the gesture of her hand on Joseph's chest looked both demanding and urgent. Joseph responded with a terse shake of his head, then glanced around as if worried about bystanders. A thick tension seemed to brew between them. Clarissa's face pinched in anger. Michelle caught only a fragment of Clarissa's raised voice. "This is embarrassing for me." Then Clarissa must have realized they had an audience, because she smoothed the front of her gown and pressed her lips together. She curled her arm through Joseph's and led him back toward the guests, summoning a brittle smile for anyone who might be watching. Michelle inhaled, pressing a hand to her suddenly racing heart. The spectacle was fleeting, but telling. This was more than just wedding day nerves. There was genuine discord simmering. Michelle retreated toward the bar, setting down her tray. She felt a strange pang, pity for Joseph and annoyance at Clarissa, laced with an odd sense of foreboding she couldn't quite place. Just then, Tiffany approached, noticing Michelle's unsettled expression. "You okay?" Michelle dragged her gaze away from the bride and groom. "Fine. I just saw them arguing." Tiffany lowered her voice. "They've been at odds all night, clashing families, clashing agendas. I heard a rumor that the bride's mother already left in a huff. Something about disrespect to her lineage. It's all hush-hush, though." Before Michelle could respond, the walkie-talkie at Tiffany's hip crackled to life. Gloria's voice came through, instructing all servers to prepare for a champagne refill before the final toast. With a weary nod, Michelle forced herself to focus on her duties, stepping away to collect a fresh tray of glasses. Inside, however, her mind kept drifting to the tension she'd witnessed. She didn't consider herself one to meddle in the affairs of the wealthy, but the stress radiating from Joseph Westbrook was palpable. She busied herself lining up flutes of champagne, but her thoughts roamed. If Joseph truly was the same man from her past, the one who vanished and never responded to her messages, It meant he was now entwined in a fraught family empire, cornered into a wedding that seemed more like a business contract. The idea sent a shiver through her. She recalled the letters she'd sent so many years ago, all returned unopened. Securing the tray under one arm, Michelle pushed away the memories. She had no concrete proof Joseph was the same man, and she couldn't afford to let speculation derail her. Her priority was surviving this wedding, earning the tip, and making sure Sierra was safe. And yet, as she headed back out onto the terrace for the toast, she couldn't shake the sense that the sparks of conflict flickering between Joseph and Clarissa were only a prelude to something far bigger, something that would change Michelle's life in ways she couldn't begin to imagine. A renewed flurry of activity took over the terrace after the cake was cut. The band launched into a series of upbeat tunes, and more guests took to the dance floor, eager to celebrate. Fairy lights trembled in the breeze overhead, while the shimmering pool beyond the lounge area provided a soft, reflective glow. From an outsider's perspective, the wedding looked every bit the lavish, cheerful occasion promised by the expensive decor and carefully arranged flowers. Yet Michelle felt the strain beneath the polished exterior. Returning from the bar with a tray of champagne flutes, she wove between exuberant dancers, trying to ignore the pang of guilt pressing in her chest. She glanced at the ornate clock mounted near the entrance to the ballroom, noting it was already getting late. Sierra was still tucked away in the kitchen, and though Jonah and Tiffany reassured her that the girl was safe, Michelle couldn't shake her own sense of unease. Bringing her child into this environment, rife with tensions, weighed heavily on her mind. As she offered champagne to a small group near a tall palm, she noticed Joseph Westbrook standing on the far edge of the dance floor. His eyes flicked between the celebratory guests and occasionally to the staff scurrying along the sidelines. The more Michelle observed, the clearer it became that Joseph was only half present in his own wedding reception. He gave polite nods and forced smiles, but there was an ever-present gravity to his gaze, as if he was preoccupied by matters no one else could see. Michelle tried to remain inconspicuous, but the memory of that brief eye contact earlier in the evening kept returning. Why had he looked at her so intently? She told herself it was sheer coincidence, yet her heart refused to settle. She set her tray down on an empty cocktail table, adjusting the edges of the tablecloth to occupy her restless hands. Her momentary reprieve was interrupted by Clarissa's voice, echoing from across the terrace. "Joseph, come here," she called, her tone sharper than one might expect at a festive gathering. Clarissa stood with a small circle of immaculately dressed guests. Her regal posture emphasized her expensive gown, but tension creased her brow. Joseph walked over, wearing an expression of mild resignation, as though bracing for another tense exchange. Without meaning to, Michelle lingered a few steps away, close enough to overhear fragments of their conversation. Clarissa was urging Joseph to greet certain influential relatives. "They traveled so far, and they're quite important to my mother," Clarissa said, her voice low but firm. "Could you at least pretend you're happy to do this?" Joseph sighed. "Of course, Clarissa, lead the way." He then offered a polite smile, the kind that never reached his eyes. Unable to stand there any longer, Michelle picked up her tray again and headed back toward the makeshift bar area. She found Kyle wiping down empty glasses, while Tiffany was busy handing a fresh bottle of sparkling wine to a passing waiter. Michelle quietly joined them, placing the half-finished champagne flutes in a neat row. Kyle glanced at Michelle, noticing her troubled expression. "You all right?" he asked, his voice low enough not to carry beyond the bar. She hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. "Just feeling out of place," she admitted. "All this grandeur, the tension between the bride and groom, having my daughter stuck in the kitchen. It's a lot." Tiffany shot her a sympathetic smile. "It is, but it's almost over, right? Another couple hours, and people will start heading home. Then we can breathe." Michelle nodded, trying to latch onto that hope. "You're right," she said softly. "I just want to make it through without any more incidents." Before Tiffany could reply, the wedding planner, a tall woman named Monique, dressed head to toe in black, interrupted, clapping her hands. "Champagne toast in 15 minutes, she announced. "Servers, please ensure all glasses are fresh. We're shifting to the final speeches soon." An air of renewed hustle spread among the staff. Michelle saw Gloria summoning 2 junior servers and directing them toward the wine storage area. Determined to focus on her job, Michelle stepped up to help organize the upcoming toast. She methodically arranged the glasses on silver trays, double-checking each one was spotless and properly filled. The band's volume dipped, providing a background ambiance rather than the spotlight. Clusters of guests broke away from dancing to mingle or find seats at the circular tables arrayed near the pool. Michelle noticed Joseph and Clarissa once more, stationed at a small dais with a microphone, presumably preparing for the final speeches of the night. Joseph's posture looked resigned, Clarissa's forced smile plastered in place. At the same time, Michelle spotted something that made her heart skip, a childlike figure near the terrace entryway, partially hidden behind a potted fern. The height, the golden curls, it had to be Sierra. Her daughter appeared to be tentatively peering at the festivities, holding her teddy bear close. Panic shot through Michelle as she realized Sierra must have slipped out of the kitchen. Quickly, Michelle handed her tray to a passing colleague and wove through the crowd. She felt her pulse drum in her ears. Sierra wasn't supposed to leave the safety of the kitchen. What if Clarissa saw her? Or worse, what if Joseph noticed the unmistakable resemblance between the little girl and himself? If he happened to look her way? Michelle reached the fern just as Sierra was about to take a hesitant step forward. Soft music and laughter enveloped them. Crouching down, Michelle gently grasped Sierra's wrist and whispered, "Sweet pea, you shouldn't be here." Sierra's eyes welled with tears. "I was just tired of sitting alone," she whispered. "I wanted to see you." Michelle's heart broke at the vulnerability in Sierra's voice. "Come on," she said softly, lifting Sierra into her arms. "I'll find a quieter spot for you. But we can't stay out here." "Not yet." Before Michelle could carry Sierra back to the kitchen, the microphone crackled and the wedding planner's voice rose over the terrace. "Ladies and gentlemen, please gather around the dais. It's time for our final toasts." Every guest turned their attention toward the dais. Michelle froze, knowing it would be nearly impossible to slip away unseen in that moment. She held Sierra tightly, inhaling the sweet scent of her daughter's hair, hoping that in the dim light no one would notice the small figure clinging to her shoulder. For now, Michelle told herself, she only had to stand still and wait. But her nerves frayed at the edges, an unspoken dread building that it might only be a matter of time before the fragile facade of this wedding was shattered, and her own secrets came tumbling out. Michelle waited, barely breathing, as the final toast began. With Sierra perched against her hip, she moved behind a tall arrangement of orchids, praying no one would look too closely. The hush that fell over the terrace was punctuated by the occasional clink of glassware. Up on the small dais, Clarissa's cousin took the microphone first, offering a polished and somewhat obligatory congratulatory speech about finding love and forging new family bonds. Polite applause followed, and the cousin made a theatrical exit. Next, an older man, one of Joseph's business associates, from what Michelle could glean, spoke at length about partnership and loyalty, tossing in mild humor about Joseph's work ethic. His words rang hollow, though the crowd laughed dutifully at each rehearsed joke. Through the gaps in the arrangement, Michelle peeked at Joseph. He stood beside Clarissa, posture straight, but his expression remained guarded. The overhead string lights reflected in his eyes, giving them a subdued glow. Clarissa, meanwhile, offered plastic smiles, looking as though she were counting down every passing second. Michelle tried to soothe Sierra by rubbing gentle circles across her back. "I'm sorry, sweet pea," she whispered. "I'll take you back soon, I promise." Sierra nodded against her mother's shoulder, but the child's small hands clenched the teddy bear with visible unease. Michelle's mind reeled with concern. Sierra wasn't used to being around so many strangers, nor this kind of formal setting. The presence of cameras, the oppressive sense of expectation, the swirl of adult tension. It was too much to force on a 6-year-old. Guilt twisted inside Michelle like a knife. As the older man wrapped up his speech, a hush of anticipation fell. It was Joseph's turn to take the microphone. Michelle felt her heart rate spike. She couldn't help wondering, hoping even, that he might say something genuine, maybe reveal the strain he was under. Though she told herself it was none of her concern, her own past regrets made her eager for some sign of authenticity. Joseph cleared his throat and began, "Thank you all for being here tonight. It means a lot to Clarissa and me to have our families and friends celebrate this milestone." He paused, scanning the crowd. "Family, in particular, is crucial to me. Many of you know that my parents couldn't be here, but I'm grateful for your support as we embark on this journey." His gaze flickered over the guests, and Michelle felt as though for a split second his eyes fell in her direction. She prayed the floral arrangement shielded her, and Sierra, adequately. Joseph continued, "I want to thank Clarissa for making me part of her extended family. I know there have been challenges along the way." His voice carried a hint of strain. Then, adopting a more confident tone, he concluded, "But I believe when we truly commit to someone, we find a way to overcome any obstacle. So here's to the future and to love that endures." Applause swelled, though Michelle detected muted undercurrents of skepticism from guests who knew more than the surface-level storyline. Clarissa took the microphone, offering her thanks as well, voice quivering slightly with a mixture of frustration and forced optimism. She ended by reminding everyone to enjoy the last dance and the late-night refreshments available in the adjacent lounge. As soon as the microphone switched off and the crowd's attention dispersed, Michelle hastily slipped away, cradling Sierra. She made it back to the kitchen corridor, chest heaving. The difference between the warm, lantern-lit terrace and the stark interior lighting made her blink rapidly. "Mommy, I'm sorry," Sierra mumbled, rubbing her eyes with a tiny fist. "I just got scared. It was too noisy in the kitchen." Michelle's breath caught. "Don't apologize, baby. I'm the one who put you in this situation." She placed Sierra down, crouching so they were eye to eye. "It'll be over soon, okay? Just a little while longer." Sierra nodded. "Okay." Her voice trembled, but she mustered courage, hugging the teddy bear close to her chest. Jonah, passing by with a stack of clean linens, slowed when he saw them. "She okay?" he asked gently. Michelle nodded, exhaustion clouding her features. "Yeah, thanks for asking." Jonah gave a warm smile. "Hang in there, Michelle. We're in the final stretch." He glanced at Sierra. "Hey, I found some cookies in the back. If it's all right with your mom, maybe you can have one." Sierra's face lit up at the mention of cookies. Michelle gave Jonah a thankful nod. "You're a lifesaver." With Sierra momentarily pacified, Michelle left her under Jonah's supervision again and slipped out to finish her shift. Her gut twisted in knots as she re-entered the terrace. The final stretch often came with unpredictable drama at weddings, especially ones that had felt strained from the start. Sure enough, she noticed Clarissa at the bar, sipping from a wine glass. A small circle of women surrounded her. Some wore forced smiles, others displayed frank disapproval. Clarissa's eyes looked glassy, as if tears might be welling just beneath the surface. Michelle tried not to stare. Instead, she set up at a nearby serving station, folding linens and collecting empty plates, hoping to fly under the radar. But then she heard Clarissa's voice, slightly slurred with emotion, ring out across the brief lull in the music. "Where's my husband gone off to now? If anyone sees him, tell him he's needed here." There was an undercurrent of anger in her words that drew everyone's attention. A hush descended once again. Michelle noticed a few guests discreetly shuffling away, not wanting to be caught in the crossfire. She realized, with a flicker of alarm, that Joseph was nowhere in sight. Tension rippled through the crowd like a silent alarm bell, and Michelle couldn't help but feel it echo in her own chest. Something was unraveling, whether she liked it or not. A subdued chatter replaced the once lively energy on the terrace. Clarissa's public demand for Joseph's whereabouts seemed to knock the wedding festivities off kilter. The band kept playing, but the tune felt forced, as though trying to fill a void left by the unspoken tension. Michelle circled the perimeter, collecting half-finished drinks and the remnants of cake. She could sense the guests' unease. Some pretended to focus on idle conversation, while others darted curious glances at Clarissa. A few even whispered about Joseph's prolonged absence. Michelle's anxiety grew with each step. She feared the meltdown that might follow if Joseph didn't return soon. She paused near a table where Tiffany and Kyle were quietly discussing the latest development. "He just vanished after the toast," Tiffany said, her brow furrowed. "He told the guests he'd be right back, but that was 10 minutes ago." Kyle shrugged, adjusting the collar of his uniform. "Probably needed a breather. Weddings like this can suffocate a person." Tiffany caught sight of Michelle listening. "Hey, you okay?" Michelle nodded hesitantly, setting a stack of dirty plates on a nearby tray. "I'm fine," she managed, though her voice wavered. She still felt uneasy about Sierra's presence in the building. The tension swirling around Clarissa and Joseph threatened to spill over, and the last thing Michelle wanted was for her daughter to witness something ugly. Just then, Gloria appeared, looking more frazzled than Michelle had ever seen her. The normally unflappable coordinator held a walkie-talkie in one hand and a clipboard in the other. "Tiffany, Kyle," she said in a clipped tone, "help the bartender rearrange the bar area. Some guests are asking for a quieter lounge. Michelle, can you come with me? We need to ensure the lounge in the next wing is set up to accommodate extra guests." Michelle nodded, glad to have a task that might distance her from the drama. She followed Gloria through a set of wide double doors leading into an adjacent hallway. The lounge in question was a smaller event space with velvet couches, candlelit tables, and tall glass windows overlooking a sculpture garden. A gentle hush enveloped the room, in stark contrast to the commotion outside. "Will you pull the drapes halfway?" Gloria asked. "We don't want the reflection from the overhead lights." She ran a hand over her tidy chignon, checking it for stray curls. "I suspect a few people will retreat here if tensions escalate." Michelle complied, drawing the heavy drapes so that the garden's moonlit view peeked through in slender panels of glass. As she worked, Gloria set about adjusting the lighting and checking if the sidebar was properly stocked. Once finished, they stood side by side, surveying the lounge. "This should do," Gloria said quietly, tension etched in her voice. "Let's head back and see if they've found Joseph." Michelle nodded, but as they turned to leave, footsteps echoed in the hallway. A tall figure came into view, Joseph Westbrook. He paused at the threshold, blinking against the softer lights in the lounge, his gaze landing on Gloria and Michelle. "Mr. Westbrook," Gloria said, relief mingling with unease. "We were just making sure this space is ready. Some guests might be looking for you soon." Joseph nodded distractedly, running a hand through his neatly styled hair. In the dim light, Michelle could see the weariness on his face. He looked older than she recalled from earlier glimpses, as though the night had drained him. "Thank you," he murmured. I just needed a moment to myself. The crowd, the questions. He trailed off. His eyes flicked toward Michelle, narrowing slightly. She held her breath, hoping he wouldn't inquire about her presence. The last thing she wanted was direct scrutiny from him. Gloria, ever the professional, cleared her throat. We'll let you be then, but your bride was asking for you. Perhaps you should. Right, Joseph cut in, sounding resigned. I'll go see her. For a heartbeat, he glanced at Michelle as if trying to place her. Then he pivoted and stepped out, leaving Gloria and Michelle in thick silence. When he was gone, Gloria let out a soft exhale. Let's head back to the terrace, she said, heading for the door. But before Michelle could follow, Gloria placed a gentle hand on her arm. Michelle, be prepared. I've seen countless weddings, and I can sense something about to break. Just stay focused on your duties and try not to get involved. Michelle nodded, her pulse quickening. Her thoughts drifted to Sierra. If something truly explosive happened, could she shield her daughter from it? She swallowed back the panic and walked beside Gloria into the hallway. As they neared the terrace, voices grew louder. Michelle recognized Clarissa's distinct tone, laced with anger. Joseph, what do you mean disappearing like that? Do you have any idea how this looks? She stood near the dais, her face contorted in exasperation. Joseph stepped closer to her, speaking in hushed, urgent tones that Michelle couldn't catch over the din of the crowd. Several guests watched the confrontation with thinly veiled interest. Michelle ducked behind a row of tall planters to avoid being caught in the crossfire. She felt a pang of empathy for Joseph, even as she fought to maintain her composure. The wedding had veered off script, and everyone felt it. Whether or not the situation would boil over entirely remained to be seen, but Michelle had a sinking feeling it would, and soon. The tension on the terrace didn't dissipate, but it grew somewhat contained when Joseph guided Clarissa into a quiet corner for a private talk. Guests resumed mingling, though a palpable sense of unease lingered. Michelle took advantage of the temporary lull to head back inside and check on Sierra. She found her daughter perched on a stool in the kitchen next to a cooler of bottled juices. Sierra swung her legs aimlessly, gazing at the stainless steel counters and piles of dirty dishes. When Michelle approached, Sierra's face lit up with relief. "Mommy, can we go home soon?" she asked softly, hugging her teddy bear. A trace of exhaustion shaded her bright eyes. Michelle nodded, her heart heavy with remorse. "Just a little while longer, sweetheart. I promise." She glanced around the bustling kitchen. Servers hustled to clear plates and refresh the bar, while the chef barked instructions about late-night snack platters. With the main courses over, the staff was in that final stage where they either cleaned up or readied a midnight buffet for dedicated partygoers. Jonah ambled over, wiping sweat from his brow. "If you need to slip out, I can watch her," he said. "But I think the manager wants all hands on deck for at least another hour." Michelle swallowed. She appreciated Jonah's kindness, but knew she couldn't abandon her post. "You've done so much already, I can't ask—" "It's no problem," Jonah interrupted, offering a kind smile. "I like her company. She's a sweetheart." He turned to Sierra. "Want to help me stack the plastic cups?" "It's fun, kind of like building blocks." Sierra's eyes sparked with a small hint of interest. "Okay," she replied, sliding off the stool. "Thank you," Michelle whispered to Jonah, her eyes reflecting gratitude. Leaving Sierra to help, Michelle hurried to the staff room in the back to freshen up. She caught a glimpse of herself in a mirror. Faint perspiration dotted her forehead, and a tired resolve sat in her eyes. She splashed cool water on her face, wishing she could step into a hot shower and wash away the stress of the evening. As she returned to the corridor, she nearly collided with Tiffany, who was carrying a tray of assorted pastries. Tiffany gave her a quick grin. "We're reloading the dessert table. How are you holding up?" Michelle mustered a small shrug. Hanging in. This wedding is intense. Tiffany rolled her eyes good-naturedly. Understatement of the year. On a brighter note, I think the final toast is done, so we're mostly dealing with late-night snackers. Let's hope that means no more big surprises. Michelle bit her lip, uncertain whether to voice the nagging feeling that bigger surprises were still looming. Instead, she nodded in agreement, turning her thoughts back to Sierra. Well, hopefully we'll get out of here soon. They parted ways, and Michelle stepped out onto the terrace once again. The breeze had cooled, and the decorative lanterns now cast flickering shadows on the stone floor. She noticed that some guests had already left. Empty chairs and half-finished glasses bore witness to an evening that had frayed at the edges. A smaller group of dedicated revelers danced near the band, while others hovered by the bar, talking in hushed tones. Scanning the area, Michelle spotted Joseph and Clarissa near the lounge's entrance. They weren't speaking. Clarissa stood with arms folded, gazing out at the dark horizon, while Joseph stared at the ground. Even from a distance, the gulf between them was evident. Michelle headed to the far side of the terrace to gather abandoned plates. As she stacked them on her tray, a voice cleared behind her. She turned, heart stuttering with anxiety, to see Joseph Westbrook standing there, hands in his pockets. He appeared reluctant yet determined, as if he had something weighing heavily on his mind. "Excuse me," he said in a low tone, glancing at her name tag. "Michelle, right?" She froze, the plates in her hand suddenly feeling heavier. "Yes, sir," she managed, forcing a polite tone. He studied her face as though trying to place a memory. "Have we met before? You look familiar." Michelle's pulse hammered. It took all her effort to keep her expression neutral. "I don't believe so," she lied softly. "I've worked a few events around Phoenix, but that's about it." Joseph's frown deepened. He murmured, lips pressing into a tight line. After a long moment, he shook his head. "Sorry to bother you. I must be mistaken." He turned to leave, and Michelle released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Then he paused, glancing back. "I appreciate your hard work tonight," he added, almost as an afterthought. "I know it's not easy. Thank you." Before Michelle could muster a response, he walked away, heading toward the resort's interior doors. She stood rooted to the spot, heart in her throat, tears pricking at the edges of her eyes. Part of her wanted to run after him, to unravel the truth right there. Another part felt overwhelming relief that he hadn't probed further. Breathing shakily, she steadied the plates and carried them to the nearest busing station. She told herself it was almost over. Just hold on until the event ended, collect her pay, and leave. No need to dredge up a past that could tear her life apart. Her biggest priority remained Sierra, safe in the kitchen with Jonah, and yet a small voice inside her acknowledged the painful, inescapable reality. The past wasn't content to stay buried. The flicker of recognition she'd seen in Joseph's eyes confirmed that her carefully managed life might be moments away from shattering. The knowledge weighed heavily on her, even as she clung to the hope that she could exit this glitzy nightmare before it all exploded. The wedding began winding down at last. The band's energy dipped, switching to mellow tunes for the stragglers still dancing. Staff quietly cleared away centerpieces, stacked unused linens, and reorganized the serving stations. Overheard conversations dwindled from loud chatter to tired murmurs. It was the late phase of the night when the only ones left were close friends, family, or those too intoxicated to leave yet. Michelle, carrying a small tower of plates, breathed a quiet sigh of relief. If she could slip out soon, she'd consider it a minor miracle. Another pang of worry for Sierra nudged at her. She hadn't checked on her daughter in at least half an hour, and her conscience jabbed her to hurry. Gloria, looking exhausted but composed, approached Michelle. "We're close to finishing, dear," she said. "When the last few guests leave, we'll finalize tips and break down the decor. You've done a great job under trying circumstances." "Thank you," Michelle replied, a hint of weary gratitude in her tone. As Gloria moved on, Michelle rushed into the kitchen. There, she found Sierra seated at a metal table, picking at the remains of a small plate of fruit. A wide yawn revealed just how tired the little girl was. Michelle's heart clenched at the dark circles under Sierra's eyes. No 6-year-old should be up this late, let alone in a bustling event kitchen. "Mommy," Sierra mumbled, blinking slowly. "Can we go now?" Michelle cupped her daughter's cheek. "Soon, sweetheart." "Just a tiny bit more." She pulled her in for a hug. "I'm sorry," she whispered, guilt weighing every word. Jonah, wiping his hands on a dish towel, approached. "It's finally calming down out there. If you need to leave, I can cover for you." Michelle shook her head. "I need the tip, Jonah, but thank you. We'll leave as soon as the final wave of cleanup starts, I promise." Sierra nodded, resigned. Michelle handed her a small juice box and returned to the terrace for what she hoped was the final lap of the night. Out among the last clusters of guests, the mood had shifted. Some indulged in after-party drinks, while others slouched on lounge chairs, chatting in subdued tones. She recognized a few distant relatives of Clarissa from earlier, their expressions filled with mild disapproval. The newlyweds were nowhere to be seen. Michelle assumed they'd retreated inside to avoid further scrutiny. Then she heard raised voices coming from the hallway that connected the terrace to the rest of the resort. Her body tensed. She left her tray on a nearby table and moved cautiously toward the sound. A few remaining guests had turned their heads in the same direction, curious. Rounding the corner, Michelle spotted Clarissa in heated conversation with an older woman who looked strikingly like her, presumably an aunt or another close relative. Although Michelle couldn't catch every word, it was evident they were arguing about Joseph's behavior, referencing how he'd disappeared and left Clarissa looking foolish. "I've warned you from the start," the older woman said sharply. "Men like him, business first, everything else second. But you insisted this was the perfect match." Clarissa's eyes flashed with anger and maybe a hint of desperation. "Stop," she hissed. "This isn't helping." When they noticed Michelle hovering, they both paused. Michelle, flustered, lowered her gaze. "Sorry, I'll head back out," she stammered, stepping away quickly to avoid their glare. She hurried toward the kitchen, her pulse racing. Her instincts told her the tipping point was near, and her priority was to gather Sierra and get out. She was just a few steps from the kitchen door when someone called her name. Michelle turned to see Tiffany jogging up, looking frazzled. "Michelle, the wedding planner is finalizing the tips. She wants everyone to gather in the staff lounge in 5 minutes." Relief mingled with anxiety. "All right, I'll be right there." Back in the kitchen, she leaned down to Sierra. "Honey, we're about to get paid, and then we can leave. Are you okay to sit here just a little longer while I talk to the planner?" Sierra nodded drowsily, her head bobbing. Jonah appeared beside them again. "I can stay with her," he said softly. "I'm done with my shift anyway." Michelle mouthed a silent thank you and took off her apron, smoothing her hair as she marched to the staff lounge down the corridor. The lounge was abuzz with subdued chatter as servers, bartenders, and kitchen aides gathered. Gloria and the planner, Monique, stood by a table piled with envelopes. Michelle lined up behind Tiffany and Kyle, waiting her turn to receive the envelope that contained her share of the tip. Butterflies roiled in her stomach. This money could cover the rent she owed, maybe buy a small treat for Sierra to make up for tonight. It also symbolized her ticket out of the night's tension. As she got closer to the front, her phone buzzed in her pocket. A quick glance revealed a text from Jonah. "Michelle, hurry back. Sierra is restless. She might wander again." Michelle swallowed hard, stepping forward to receive her envelope. She thanked Monique with a polite nod, stuffed the envelope into her pocket, and pivoted, prepared to collect Sierra and disappear into the Phoenix night. Yet the urgent feeling wouldn't leave her. The building hum of confrontation among the wedding party, Joseph's unresolved questions, and her own past secrets all seemed to collide in her mind. She dashed back toward the kitchen, determined to sweep Sierra into her arms and head for the car. As she rounded the final corner, she felt a sudden chill of dread. The hallway was empty. The spot where Sierra had been sitting was now vacant, the juice box left abandoned on the metal table. Michelle's heart lurched. Sierra was gone. Michelle's pulse hammered in her ears as she stood in the empty hallway. Her eyes locked on the abandoned juice box on the metal table, the same spot where Sierra had been just minutes ago. Panic seized her. She set down her tip envelope, her legs trembling. How could her daughter vanish inside a resort teeming with staff and wedding guests? She crossed the kitchen in quick strides, scanning each station for Sierra's golden curls. Pots simmered on stovetops, and line cooks busily cleaned surfaces, but there was no sign of her little girl. Michelle pressed her hand to her chest, breath shallow with fear. "Jonah!" she called, weaving around bustling servers. "Jonah, where are you?" He emerged from behind a stack of crates, alarm flickering in his eyes. "Michelle, she was here a second ago. I stepped away to grab a washcloth, and when I came back, she was gone." His voice carried the guilt of someone who felt he'd failed. "She must have gone looking for me," Michelle said, her mouth dry. "She's probably wandering through the corridors." Jonah apologized profusely, but Michelle shook her head. "It's not your fault," she managed. "We just need to find her before—" She didn't finish the sentence, dreading the possibility of Clarissa or Joseph crossing paths with Sierra. Without another word, they split up. Michelle hastened toward the main corridor that branched to various wings of the resort. Her footsteps echoed under the high ceilings, heart pounding in time. She glanced into open doors, empty meeting rooms, a quiet lounge with dimmed lights, deserted staff quarters, calling Sierra's name in hushed urgency. The resort seemed to stretch endlessly, corridors leading to opulent suites, private lounges closed off for the night, winding staircases to upper terraces. Michelle's stomach churned with every passing second. Where could Sierra have gone? Finally, Michelle decided to head for the last place she wanted to be, back toward the reception area. It was the biggest open space, with plenty of corners for a child to hide. She sprinted past the staff lounge, where the other servers were busily sorting out final tips, and slipped through the doors to the terrace. The once bustling dance floor was now a shadow of itself, only a handful of guests lingering. Overhead, the lanterns flickered in the desert breeze. She scanned the terrace, breath catching when she thought she glimpsed a small figure near the dais, but it was just a stray piece of white linen fluttering in the wind. Michelle's heart wrenched painfully. How could Sierra vanish so easily in a matter of minutes? Voices rose from a corner near the bar, a group of late-night revelers sharing one last toast. She forced herself to approach calmly, not wanting to create a scene, but inside she was desperate. "Have any of you seen a little girl?" Michelle asked breathlessly. She described Sierra's golden curls and her pink dress. Each face offered a blank stare or a polite shake of the head. Disappointment choked Michelle's hope. Not wanting to alarm the entire wedding, she suppressed an urge to shout Sierra's name. Glancing toward the far end of the terrace, she spotted a row of tall planters and an exit leading into the resort's west wing. Maybe Sierra had slipped through there. She hurried in that direction, her mind racing. She paused at a decorative fountain in a narrow walkway. Water trickled over the stones in a gentle, mocking melody. Michelle placed a trembling hand on the fountain's rim, trying to catch her breath. Sierra was 6, old enough to wander but too young to navigate a labyrinthine resort on her own. Where could she have gone? A soft voice behind her made Michelle spin. "Are you all right, miss?" It was Kyle, the bartender, stepping out through a side door, 2 empty champagne bottles in his hands. Concern lined his features when he noticed Michelle's teary eyes. "I'm looking for Sierra," Michelle replied, forcing the words past the lump in her throat. "She wandered off." Kyle set the bottles down immediately, scanning the walkway. "I'll help. Let's check the pool area." They hurried toward the pool, where a few leftover guests lounged on chairs, finishing their drinks. Lights shimmered on the water's surface. Michelle moved around the deck, calling Sierra's name softly, bracing herself for the worst, but there was no sign of her daughter. Kyle jogged around the opposite side, shaking his head. Desperation thickened in Michelle's chest. She hadn't felt fear like this since the day she discovered Joseph had vanished from her life all those years ago. Now, another precious part of her world was missing, and she had no idea what to do. Then, from the corner of her eye, she noticed a small footstep imprint on the damp stone floor, leading to a hedge-framed path. It might have been made by a child's shoe. She clutched at that faint glimmer of hope, gesturing for Kyle to follow. "Stay near the pool if she comes back this way," Michelle said. "I'm going to follow these prints." She hurried along the path, the hedge scratching her arms as she slipped past. Her heart hammered, each thud echoing the thought of Sierra alone somewhere in the dark. Finally, the path opened to a secluded garden area with a stone bench. Moonlight illuminated a tiny figure curled up against the bench's side, hugging a teddy bear. Michelle's eyes flooded with relief. "Sierra!" The girl looked up, her cheeks wet with tears. "Mommy!" she wailed, reaching out. Michelle scooped her daughter into her arms, hugging her tightly as tears of her own threatened to spill. Sierra's small frame trembled, her voice wobbling. "I couldn't find you. I got lost." Michelle rocked her gently. "It's okay, sweet pea. I'm here now." She pressed a kiss to Sierra's forehead, guilt and gratitude flooding her system. For a moment, they stayed that way, mother and daughter clinging to each other in the soft desert night. But just as Michelle began leading Sierra back along the hedge-bordered path, the faint sound of footsteps made her freeze. Footsteps and a sharp, frantic voice drifting from the main terrace. It was Joseph, calling out for someone, his voice tinged with alarm. "Clarissa! Where are you?" Michelle's heart lurched again, the moment of calm shattered by the echo of Joseph's voice. She pressed a hand to Sierra's back, an unspoken plea for quiet, as the swirl of tension resumed, wrapping around them like the night air. Something was happening out there, something that might irrevocably change all their lives. With Sierra safe by her side, Michelle's immediate panic subsided, but a new dread took its place. Joseph was mere steps away, his concerned voice cutting through the garden's tranquility. She crouched behind the hedges, Sierra's hand clasped in hers. Moonlight revealed the worry etched on Joseph's face as he searched the walkway leading from the terrace. "Clarissa!" he called again, stepping further into the garden. His gaze swept the shadows, oblivious to Michelle and Sierra hidden behind the dense foliage. Each second felt like a razor's edge. Michelle's heart pounded in her ears, terrified that Joseph would see Sierra's bright curls in the moonlight and instantly recognize the little girl's resemblance to himself. Finally, Joseph sighed, his voice trailing off. "Why does everything have to fall apart tonight?" he muttered, his words thick with frustration. He turned and walked back toward the terrace, shoulders slumped. Silence settled once more. Michelle exhaled a shaky breath. She looked down at Sierra, who seemed on the verge of tears again. "It's okay," Michelle whispered, hugging her daughter's shoulders gently. "Let's get our things and go." They emerged cautiously onto the main walkway, The terrace lights glowed ahead, but Michelle stuck to the edges, skirting the area where guests still milled around. She led Sierra inside through the staff entrance, passing the chaotic bustle of cleanup. The staff lounge was emptying now, most of her fellow workers having collected their pay and left. Tiffany and Kyle were nowhere in sight, presumably tidying up the bar area one last time. Michelle grabbed her tip envelope from the table where she'd left it in her frantic search for Sierra. She made a quick mental calculation. Tonight's payment would at least cover a month's rent and some overdue bills. She felt a surge of relief that reminded her this exhausting ordeal hadn't been for nothing. Tucking the envelope into her purse, she guided Sierra to the exit, but just as they reached the side doors, they heard voices emanating from the main lobby. A new kind of tension bled through the air, the echoes resonating off the marble floors. "Where do you think you're going?" snapped an angry female voice. Michelle froze, certain for a terrifying moment that the words were directed at her. Then she realized it was Clarissa speaking, her sharp tone unmistakable. Peering around the corner, Michelle saw Clarissa confronting Joseph in the lobby. Even from a distance, Michelle noticed the bride's flushed face, eyes shining with either tears or fury. Joseph stood rigid, his hands at his sides, as though resisting the urge to defend himself physically. "I'm going to check with the front desk," Joseph said evenly, though emotion cracked the edges of his voice. "I thought you went upstairs, but apparently not. I can't find you anywhere." Clarissa let out a bitter laugh that echoed under the high lobby ceiling. "Can you blame me for wanting to get away? You've been gone half the night. Everyone's wondering where their charming host is. And your father—" She choked on her words. "He didn't even bother showing up, which left me humiliated in front of my own guests." Joseph scrubbed a hand over his face. "I told you, I had no control over my parents' choices. We discussed it." "Did we?" Clarissa demanded, "because it feels like all we've done is pretend. My mother insisted this wedding was a perfect alliance, and I was foolish enough to believe it. But you've barely looked at me all evening." Michelle swallowed hard, inching backward. She felt like an intruder on a very private meltdown, yet she couldn't tear herself away, uncertain if Joseph and Clarissa might lunge in her direction or wander further, possibly discovering Sierra. She signaled for her daughter to stay close, pressing a reassuring hand on Sierra's arm. Joseph shook his head, speaking softly. Michelle couldn't catch every word, but she heard him say, "I'm sorry. This was never just about you." "My life's complicated." Clarissa's voice rose, slicing through the lobby's hush. "Don't give me that. If this marriage is such a burden, then why did you agree to it?" He swallowed, tension lining his jaw. "I thought—" He paused, breath ragged. "I thought I was doing the right thing. I'm not heartless, Clarissa. But we both knew this was partly about business." Clarissa's eyes brimmed with tears, though anger still dominated her expression. "You let your family manipulate you, Joseph, or maybe you just never loved me to begin with." She spun on her heel, storming off toward a side corridor, leaving Joseph alone in the wide, echoing space. He pressed a hand to his brow, shoulders sagging in defeat. For a moment, he looked heartbreakingly vulnerable, as if on the brink of losing everything. Michelle bit her lip, torn by a sudden wave of empathy. This was the man who, if her suspicions were right, had unknowingly fathered Sierra. Observing him now, trapped in a marriage entangled with family obligations, straining under the weight of expectations, she couldn't help but remember her own confusion and heartbreak when he'd disappeared from her life. So many questions hung in the air. Could this entire tragedy have been avoided if those letters had reached him? Clutching Sierra's hand, Michelle steeled herself. It wasn't her place to intervene, especially not now. She led her daughter away before Joseph or Clarissa could see them. Only once they were outside, the desert night enveloping them, did Michelle allow herself to breathe again. They walked quickly across the resort's grand parking lot, past rows of luxury cars glinting in the moonlight. Michelle's old sedan sat at the far end. She helped Sierra into the passenger seat, then slid behind the wheel, hands shaking on the steering column. But just as she was about to start the engine, Sierra gazed at her with those earnest blue-green eyes, a question lingering on her lips. "Mommy, who was that man?" For a beat, Michelle couldn't speak, her soul torn between shielding Sierra from the truth and an insistent pulse of honesty she could barely contain. Michelle gripped the steering wheel, the cool vinyl biting into her palms. She stared at the dashboard, her reflection faintly visible in the windshield under the resort's parking lot lights. Sierra's question lingered in the stale night air. "Mama?" Sierra's small voice prompted again, gentle but probing. "Who was that man calling for the lady?" Michelle inhaled, trying to steady her trembling breath. She thought about brushing it off, telling Sierra it was just a guest at the wedding, but as she gazed into her daughter's upturned face, she recalled the swirl of secrets that had tormented her for 6 years. Lies and half-truths had governed her own life for too long. Perhaps it was time for a different approach, yet the thought of explaining such a complicated past to a 6-year-old felt overwhelming. She gently touched Sierra's cheek. "Sweet pea," she began, her voice tight. "He's someone I used to know long ago." Sierra tilted her head curiously, still hugging her teddy bear. "Did he make you sad?" The child's simple question broke Michelle's composure. She closed her eyes, tears slipping down her cheeks. "A little," she admitted, "but it's all right. Let's not worry about that now. We'll talk more when you're older, okay?" Sierra nodded slowly, a seriousness settling in her youthful features. Michelle started the engine, the old sedan sputtering before coming to life. As she drove away from the glowing entrance of Camelback Mountain Resort, her shoulders sank with relief. They were finally leaving this tumultuous night behind, but her mind wouldn't rest. The tension between Joseph and Clarissa still echoed in her thoughts, mingling with the fleeting recognition she'd seen in Joseph's eyes when he looked at her. He was so close to the truth. Did he sense it? Would he keep searching for answers? And what would happen if he discovered Sierra's existence? Michelle turned onto a quieter road, the city lights of Phoenix visible in the distance. She glanced at Sierra, who had dozed off, her head lolling against the seat. The drama of the evening had clearly drained the little girl. Guilt pricked Michelle's conscience. She'd subjected Sierra to something no child should experience. But the financial necessity had overshadowed every other concern. Slowing to a stop at a red light, Michelle breathed in the desert night air, seeping through a crack in the window. She told herself she'd done what she had to do. She told herself that Joseph, if it was indeed the same Joseph from her past, had chosen his path, forging a life in an upscale realm far beyond her world. That door had closed years ago, she reminded herself. When she finally reached her modest apartment complex, she carried Sierra inside. The tired child stirred just enough to mumble a good night as Michelle tucked her into the small bed they shared. The living room was cramped and cluttered, a stark contrast to the polished floors and glittering lights of the resort. Michelle tossed her purse onto the worn sofa, feeling the weight of the tip envelope inside. She ran a hand through her tousled dark hair. The money would help, but a deeper ache throbbed in her chest, one not so easily remedied by finances. Memories slid through her mind of the fleeting romance she once had, the unexpected pregnancy and the subsequent heartbreak that had driven her to quiet determination, forging ahead alone. In the hush of the apartment, she rummaged through an old cardboard box on a high closet shelf. At the bottom lay letters she'd tried to send long ago, each one stamped with a "Return to Sender" or "Unknown Address" label. Michelle's heart clenched as she touched the envelopes, each a testament to her unanswered pleas for contact. She hadn't looked at them in years, letting the hurt fester unacknowledged. Now, every painful question roared to life. Could Joseph have been telling the truth about never receiving any letters, or had he really turned his back on her? She recalled the vulnerability in his eyes at the wedding. Something told her he wasn't the cold, indifferent man she'd pictured in her worst nightmares. She sank onto the couch, the box in her lap. If Joseph had discovered the truth tonight, if he knew he had a daughter, what would he do? Michelle's mind spun with scenarios. Perhaps he would deny everything, or maybe he'd confront her, demanding to know why she hid Sierra for so many years. And what if he wanted to be part of Sierra's life now? The thought both terrified and warmed her. Her gaze flicked toward the bedroom, where Sierra slept peacefully, unaware of the maelstrom in her mother's mind. Michelle bit her lip, tears threatening again. She tried to recall Gloria's comforting words about courage and resilience. Yes, she'd survived 6 hard years on her own. She could survive this too. She slipped the letters back into the box, telling herself she'd decide what to do with them later. Maybe the best course was to lock them away once more, pretend the night at Camelback Mountain never happened, and forge ahead with the life she'd built. But that pang of doubt lingered, whispering that truth had a way of surfacing, especially when secrets ran this deep. The quiet hum of the refrigerator filled the small room, a fragile sense of calm returning. Michelle leaned back against the cushions, letting exhaustion overtake her. One way or another, she sensed her life was about to change. Tonight's chaos at the wedding wasn't just an isolated event. It felt like the spark igniting a fuse, and she had no idea how far or how fast the flames would travel. For now, though, she closed her eyes, breathing in the familiar scent of her cluttered but comforting home. Sierra was safe, and she had enough money to cover next month's rent. Those facts, at least, were solid. The rest would have to wait until morning. Dawn light streamed through the thin curtains, tinting the walls of Michelle's living room a pale gold. She stirred awake on the couch, arms stiff from having slept in an awkward position. For a moment, she forgot the previous night's chaos, but then the events of the luxury wedding came rushing back. The tension, Clarissa's anger, Joseph's uncertain gaze, Sierra's disappearance in the resort. Wearily, Michelle sat up, a mild ache in her lower back. She listened for sounds of Sierra stirring. Silence reigned, implying her daughter was still asleep in the bedroom. Grateful for a moment to collect her thoughts, Michelle rummaged in the small kitchen, placing a kettle on the stove to boil water for instant coffee. Stepping over last night's shoes and the scattered contents of her purse, Michelle noticed the tip envelope on the counter. She picked it up, counting the bills methodically, feeling a flash of relief. This was no trivial sum. The wedding's lavishness had translated into generous gratuities for the serving staff. She allowed herself a tiny smile. Perhaps she could settle some overdue bills, buy fresh groceries, and replace the pair of shoes Sierra had outgrown. Her mind drifted to Joseph Westbrook and the question Sierra had asked. Who was that man? In a different world, Joseph might have been the one waiting in the kitchen with fresh coffee, part of a stable family routine. But fate had set them on separate paths, or so she told herself. The disquiet remained. Could fate still be undone? The whistle of the kettle pulled her from her reverie. She poured the steaming water over a spoonful of coffee, stirring absently. A soft sound behind her made Michelle turn, Sierra rubbing her eyes, hair a tumble of curls against her small shoulders. "Morning, sweet pea," Michelle said gently. "Hungry? We have cereal." Sierra yawned and nodded. "Okay." She climbed onto a kitchen chair, looking sleepily at the countertop. Michelle poured cereal into a bowl, adding milk, and slid it over to Sierra. They shared a quiet moment as the child ate. After a few bites, Sierra's gaze flicked up. "Are we okay, Mummy?" she asked, her voice threaded with uncertainty. Michelle's heart squeezed. "Yes, baby, we are," she replied. "Last night was stressful, but it's over now." Sierra nodded, then lifted another spoonful to her mouth. Michelle watched her daughter's shoulders relax, reminding herself that while the wedding drama might be simmering still in her own mind, Sierra needed stability. A knock at the door suddenly interrupted the moment, making Michelle's hand jump. She glanced at the time, 7:30 in the morning, an odd hour for visitors. Her stomach twisted, fearing it might be someone from the wedding staff, or, worse, Joseph himself. She approached the door with a cautious step, heart pounding. "Michelle? It's Kayla," a familiar voice called from the other side. Relief washed over Michelle. She opened the door to find her friend Kayla standing there, looking apologetic. "I'm so sorry about yesterday," Kayla said, shoulders slumping. "My daughter's fever shot up, and I had to take her to urgent care." Michelle let out a breath. "Oh, it's okay, really. How's she doing?" Kayla offered a tentative smile. "Better now. I just felt terrible knowing you had that big job." "Did everything go okay?" Her gaze slid past Michelle into the apartment, landing on Sierra. Michelle opened the door wider, gesturing for Kayla to come in. "We managed," she said wryly, "but it was more complicated than I ever expected." They moved into the living room, Kayla settling on the couch. Sierra, still in her pajamas, padded over and gave Kayla a shy hug. Michelle poured Kayla a cup of coffee, then sat down next to her, the tension in her shoulders receding now that a friend was near. "So, how was this fancy wedding?" Kayla asked. "You get a decent tip?" Michelle nodded, a half-hearted grin tugging at her lips. "I did, but the bride and groom had issues." She hesitated, wondering how much to share. "I can't go into details, but let's just say it was a night of revelations." Kayla lifted her eyebrows curiously. "Sounds intense." "It was," Michelle agreed, recalling the swirl of secrets, the near encounter with Joseph, and the shock of almost losing Sierra in that crowd. "Anyway, we got through it, and at least the money will help." Kayla gave a sympathetic smile, reaching out to squeeze Michelle's hand. "If you ever need me to watch Sierra again, I know." "Thank you," Michelle said, genuine gratitude coloring her voice. "I appreciate it." They fell into an easy chatter about everyday things, bills, groceries, Kayla's daughter's recovery, the typical concerns of working single mothers. Michelle felt the knot in her chest loosen slightly, comforted by her friend's presence. Yet as they spoke, an unspoken weight pressed on Michelle's mind. She remembered the glimpse of confusion and longing in Joseph's eyes. If their paths were to cross again, and she sensed that possibility growing, would she be ready to face it? For now, she kept those questions at bay, focusing on the warmth of Kayla's visit and the simple pleasure of Sierra's laughter. The future was uncertain, but she had survived another day, carried by a quiet strength that had become her constant companion. She would meet whatever came next with the same resolve, shielding Sierra and protecting the small world they'd built together, unless, perhaps, a chance at a fuller life beckoned her to reconsider everything she thought she knew. The following week brought a semblance of normalcy. Michelle resumed her routine, waking before dawn to prepare Sierra for school, then juggling shifts at her usual cafe job. She paid off a few bills using the tip from the wedding and even bought Sierra a new pair of sneakers, pink and sparkly, the ones she'd been eyeing for months. It felt good to offer her daughter a small treat. Yet, beneath this veneer of routine, Michelle struggled with sleepless nights. Every time her eyes closed, she relived that moment in the resort garden. Joseph's voice calling out, his silhouette framed by moonlight. She often jolted awake, heart pounding, feeling again that dread of being discovered, More troubling were the half-formed daydreams where she imagined telling Joseph the truth about Sierra, about the letters, about everything. She woke from those reveries sweating, unsure whether they were nightmares or fantasies. Friday arrived, and Michelle finished her morning shift at the cafe. She tied up her apron in the back, retrieving her phone to check messages. A number she didn't recognize had left a missed call and a voicemail. Curiosity prickled at her. She pressed play, bracing herself. "Hello, Ms. Cox?" a woman's voice said, clipped but polite. "My name is Helen Ward. I represent the Westbrook family, Mr. Joseph Westbrook in particular. He would like to speak with you regarding your services at last week's event. Please call me back at your earliest convenience. Thank you." Michelle froze, blood thrumming in her ears. The Westbrook family. Joseph had found her contact info. A cold sweat broke out on her brow. Why did he want to speak with her? Had he asked about the child who resembled him so strongly? Was this about returning some item she'd left behind? Or was it bigger than that? Her mind reeled with possibilities. If Joseph had recognized her, maybe he pieced together enough to suspect Sierra's true parentage. She inhaled shakily, trying to calm the frantic beating of her heart. She couldn't afford panic. The cafe's kitchen bustled around her, oblivious to the tempest raging inside her mind. Dismissing her final duties, she quickly clocked out, tossing her apron over her shoulder. Outside, the heat of midday Phoenix enveloped her, and she squinted against the sun. She couldn't think straight here. She needed privacy. She hurried to her car, the metal door handle scorching her fingers. Once seated, air conditioning blasting, she stared at her phone. Should she return the call or ignore it? Fear warred with a strange flicker of hope. Perhaps Joseph truly hadn't abandoned her years ago. If so, he might be searching for answers too. Summoning her courage, she tapped the callback number. Each ring pounded in her ears. Finally, the same clipped voice answered, "Helen Ward's office." Michelle's throat constricted. Hello. This is Michelle Cox. I received a message earlier." "Yes, Miss Cox. Thank you for returning my call," Helen said, a cordial but cool tone. "Mr. Westbrook would like to meet with you in person. Can you come to the Westbrook Tower offices tomorrow afternoon at 2? Michelle's mind raced. The Westbrook Tower was an imposing skyscraper downtown, known for housing Joseph's real estate ventures. This was no casual conversation. What is this about?" she asked, voice trembling despite her attempt at composure. "I'm not at liberty to disclose details," Helen replied, "but Mr. Westbrook specifically requested your presence. Will you be available?" Michelle swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Fear jammed her instincts, urging her to hang up and never look back. But a deeper part of her recognized this might be the moment she dreaded and yearned for in equal measure. Confrontation with the truth. A chance to set things right or at least understand what went wrong so many years ago. Clutching the phone, she heard her own voice say, "Yes, I can be there." "Excellent," Helen said. "I'll text you the address and instructions for accessing the building. Please arrive on time." Before Michelle could muster another word, the line disconnected. She stared at the screen, heart pounding like a drum roll. Her reflection in the rearview mirror showed wide eyes and parted lips. Was she making a terrible mistake, or was this an inevitable step forward? For the rest of the day, she oscillated between panic and a cautious optimism. She told Kayla she had an important appointment downtown and asked if she could watch Sierra. Kayla agreed, though she noticed Michelle's tense demeanor. "Is everything okay?" her friend asked. Michelle forced a strained smile. "I'm not sure yet, but I have to do this." The night passed in a blur of anxious thoughts. She clung to Sierra, reading her daughter an extra bedtime story, inhaling the scent of her curls, trying to quell the dread stirring in her stomach. Tomorrow, she would walk into Westbrook Tower, a place of glass and steel where Joseph Westbrook shaped his empire. She had no idea if she'd emerge relieved, devastated, or somewhere in between. At dawn, she prepared herself with a slow breath. This was her choice, to confront Joseph at last, to face the possibility that all her assumptions about him might be wrong or horribly accurate. Either way, she would find out. And once she did, her life and Sierra's would never be the same again. A restless grey sky hung over Phoenix as Michelle guided her aging sedan through downtown traffic, heading toward Westbrook Tower. She kept glancing at the clock. 1:45 p.m. The 15 minutes she had before her scheduled meeting with Joseph felt like an eternity, yet each tick of the second hand made her chest tighten. Sierra was safely at Kayla's apartment, playing with Kayla's daughter. Michelle's stomach churned with guilt at having told her only that Mommy has an important errand. She was terrified that by day's end she might have to explain a whole lot more, that everything Sierra believed about her father was about to change. At last, Michelle parked in a multi-level garage adjoining a sleek skyscraper of tinted glass. The imposing sign read, Westbrook Tower, each letter in polished metal. She stepped out, feeling small in the swirl of businessmen and women hurrying across the sky bridge to the lobby. Her reflection in the sliding glass doors revealed the careful effort she'd put into her appearance. A modest blouse, black slacks, hair brushed and pinned, yet her eyes brimmed with nerves, revealing an anxiety she couldn't hide. Inside, the lobby soared with vaulted ceilings and pristine marble floors. A security guard at the desk directed her to the 38th floor, where Helen Ward's office was located. Michelle's heart thumped with every ding of the elevator as it rose. When the doors opened, a minimalist reception area awaited, frosted glass walls, modern furniture, and hush-toned carpeting. A woman with sleek hair and a crisp suit greeted Michelle. "Miss Cox, correct?" she said briskly. "I'm Helen Ward." Michelle managed a nod, her throat too tight for a verbal response. Helen led her through a corridor of private offices, each enclosed by glass partitions. Michelle peered in as they passed, glimpsing serious-looking associates poring over documents. At the end of the hall, Helen opened a door and gestured for Michelle to enter. There, in a spacious corner office overlooking the Phoenix skyline, stood Joseph Westbrook. Gone was the formal tuxedo from the wedding. He wore a tailored suit in charcoal grey, his expression taut as he turned from the window to face her. For a moment, neither spoke. Michelle felt as though time slowed, the hum of the city below fading into a dull hush. Helen shut the door quietly, leaving them alone. Michelle swallowed. "Hello?" Joseph nodded, his eyes scrutinizing her as though searching for details left unspoken. "Michelle," he said, voice low and guarded, "thank you for coming." Her palms dampened, but she clasped them together. "You asked to see me about the wedding. I'm not sure what more I can tell you." Joseph exhaled, running a hand through his neatly styled hair. "I need to ask you some questions. This isn't about catering or finances. It's personal." He hesitated, stepping closer. "When we spoke at the wedding, you seemed familiar. And afterward, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd known you before. Something about you, your eyes. It's been haunting me all week." Michelle's pulse pounded. She recalled the romance they once shared, how he made her laugh in a dusty roadside diner on a night that felt both spontaneous and fated. But she also remembered the letters, every one of them returned unopened. "You left Phoenix 6 years ago," she said quietly, voice trembling. "You might have known a lot of people back then." He blinked, taken aback by her directness. "Yes, I did leave. My family's business expanded overseas, and I went to London. But that doesn't explain this deep certainty that our paths crossed more than casually. Michelle, did we ever... He trailed off, struggling to find the right words. Pain welled in her chest. She wanted to demand answers. Why he vanished, why he never wrote back. But fear clashed with longing, leaving her paralyzed. Finally, she forced herself to speak. Yes, Joseph, we did meet, a little over 6 years ago. We were close for a brief time. Her gaze faltered, but then you were gone. With no explanation, no way to reach you, nothing. Joseph's face went taut, shock and regret flickering in his eyes. That can't be right. I never received any messages from you. A wave of familiar bitterness rose in Michelle's throat. I wrote to you several times. I got every letter returned. Eventually, I assumed you just didn't care. She tried to keep her voice steady, but old wounds bled raw emotion into every syllable. He shook his head, confusion etched in his features. I promise you, I never saw any letters. My father, my family, they can be overbearing. I wouldn't put it past them to intercept my mail if they thought it would cause a scandal. You know how they are. Michelle's eyes burned with tears she refused to let fall. She studied his expression, trying to gauge sincerity. There was a rawness in his voice that matched the heartbreak she'd carried alone for so long. She took a shaky breath. You walked away from something much bigger than you realize. Joseph's posture stiffened. How do you mean? She hesitated, mind darting to Sierra, her bright smile, her unyielding faith in her mother. If she said the words now, there would be no going back. Yet the memory of Sierra's question, who was that man, pushed her forward. I have a daughter, Joseph, she whispered. Her name is Sierra. She's 6 years old. Joseph blanched, eyes widening. Silence stretched between them, a thick cord of realization and fear. Michelle's chest tightened, bracing for his reaction. You have a daughter, he repeated, voice shaking. And you're telling me that she's... Michelle inhaled, voice trembling. She's ours. The weight of that admission sank into the hushed office. Joseph looked stunned, as though the entire skyscraper might crumble beneath him. Tears now pricked at Michelle's eyes. Everything had changed, and there would be no returning to the world of half-truths. The vow she'd made to protect Sierra at all costs still held, but now the father she'd believed gone forever stood before her, reeling with the knowledge that he had a child he never knew existed. Michelle watched Joseph stagger back, gripping the edge of his desk. The manicured control he'd displayed so often cracked, giving way to raw disbelief. His voice was unsteady. 6 years? You mean I've missed it all? She felt her own anger mixing with compassion. I wanted to tell you, she said quietly. I tried, but with every letter I sent, no reply came back. Eventually, I had to accept the idea that you didn't want me or her in your life. His gaze flicked up, pained. I never would have abandoned you if I'd known. I swear it. He pressed a hand over his mouth, then raked his fingers through his hair again. My father must have... God, this is so typical of him. Intercepting letters to protect the family name. But I can't believe they would go this far. He paused, swallowing hard. I missed everything. Her birth, her first steps, everything. Michelle's chest constricted. 1,000 questions knotted inside her, but she saw the grief etched in his eyes and recognized it as genuine. I know how it feels to lose something important, she said softly. But you have to understand, I built a life around the assumption you didn't care. Joseph stared out the window at the Phoenix skyline, blinking hard. What's her name again? Sierra, Michelle replied, voice gentling. She found an unexpected ache of sympathy for him, balanced precariously with the remnants of her anger. Sierra Cox. He closed his eyes, exhaling. Sierra, does she look like... Like you. Yes, Michelle whispered, heart twisting. She recalled how Sierra's golden curls and startlingly blue-green eyes mirrored Joseph's. She has my hair color, but her eyes, they're exactly yours. A thick silence settled. Then Joseph cleared his throat. I want to meet her. Michelle's heart pounded anew. The final boundary was being crossed. She'd always imagined a day like this might come, yet now that it was here, fear cut through her. Meeting her won't be simple, she managed. She's used to me, and only me. She's never asked much about a father because I never had answers to give. Joseph's jaw tightened in resolve. I understand, but please, let me see her. You say I've missed 6 years. I don't want to lose more time. Michelle felt tears threaten again. Despite the heartache, she recognized the longing in his voice. It was the same fierce protectiveness she felt for Sierra. I'll have to prepare her. She's just a child. Joseph nodded, voice trembling. I'll wait. However long it takes. He seemed to gather himself, straightening. But there's more I need to tell you. My marriage, it's in shambles. I know you saw a glimpse of that at the wedding. The mention of Clarissa made Michelle tense. The memory of that chaotic night was still fresh. Clarissa's frosty anger, Joseph's quiet despair. I figured it wasn't a happy arrangement, she said carefully. But that's your concern, not mine. A flicker of vulnerability crossed his face. Everything's entangled, my parents, Clarissa's family, business investments, but after what I've learned today, I can't keep living that lie. He hesitated, regret shining in his gaze. I plan to end it. Michelle wasn't sure how to respond. Part of her recoiled from any involvement in his marital mess. Yet another part, the hopeful flicker inside her heart, wanted to believe he was willing to break away from a broken arrangement to be present for Sierra. Eventually, she stepped forward, voice measured. This conversation isn't easy for me, Joseph. I've spent years building a world for my daughter, one without you. If you're serious about being in her life, you need to prove it. I won't have her hurt by false promises. He nodded solemnly. I don't blame you for doubting me. Let me show you. Let me do whatever it takes. The quiet sincerity in his tone made her chest ache. They stood there, two people with an ocean of history between them, the bright cityscape behind Joseph's window, ironically symbolizing the future's vast unknowns. Michelle took a small piece of paper from her purse, scribbling her phone number. Call me, she said. We'll figure out a way for you to meet Sierra on my terms. Joseph accepted the slip of paper, the muscles in his throat moving as he swallowed. For a moment, he looked like he might cry. Thank you, he whispered. Michelle nodded, eyes shimmering. Without another word, she turned and walked out. She passed Helen Ward in the corridor, who offered a polite nod, and hurried to the elevator before her composure shattered. It was only once she was safely in her car, engine idling, that she released a ragged sob, a swirl of relief, confusion, fear, and unexpected hope spilled out. At home, Kayla's face fell when Michelle recounted the conversation. So he didn't abandon you on purpose? Kayla asked quietly. Michelle shook her head, tears brimming. He says he didn't know, that his father blocked him from receiving the letters. Kayla sighed. There's a lot to process, but maybe it's not too late for Sierra to have a father in her life. Michelle looked toward the bedroom door, beyond which Sierra played. I want what's best for her, she murmured. I just don't know if it's him. But I'll give him a chance to prove himself. In the dimming twilight, as she settled Sierra in for bed, Michelle cradled her daughter's curls. One question pulsed through her mind. Could Joseph truly be the father Sierra deserved? She reminded herself that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new hopes. For now, Sierra was safe, and Michelle had taken a step toward facing the past head-on. The rest would unfold in due time, guided by a fragile willingness to trust once more. Days passed in a swirl of quiet anticipation. Michelle received daily calls from Joseph, respectful, measured, never pushing too hard. He gave updates on the steps he was taking to end his marriage to Clarissa, though Michelle insisted on keeping a cautious distance from that storm. Her single focus was Sierra. At night, Michelle wondered how best to tell Sierra about Joseph. The child's life thus far had revolved around the two of them, with occasional babysitters and friends, but no paternal figure. She knew Sierra might be confused or upset. Yet, with every phone conversation, Joseph's earnest desire to meet his daughter chipped away at Michelle's doubts. Finally, on a breezy Saturday morning, Michelle gathered enough courage to have the talk. She found Sierra in their snug living room, coloring a princess in her sketchbook. The window let in fresh sunlight, illuminating the small but cozy space. "Honey," Michelle began, heart fluttering. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" Sierra looked up from her coloring. "Sure, Mommy." She padded over, perched on the edge of the couch, pink crayons still clutched in her hand. Her big, curious eyes gazed at Michelle expectantly. Michelle inhaled slowly. "Remember how you asked about that man at the wedding?" She studied Sierra's face for any sign of recognition. Sierra nodded, frowning slightly. "The one who looked sad?" Michelle swallowed. "Yes, him. His name is Joseph Westbrook." She paused, searching for the right words. "He's someone from my past, before you were born." Sierra's brow knitted. "Did you like him?" "It's complicated," Michelle replied, placing a gentle hand on Sierra's knee. "He and I were close for a short time, but then he left. I thought he'd chosen to stay away, but it turns out there were misunderstandings. Now he's back, and—" She steeled herself, tears burning at the corners of her eyes. "He's your father, Sweet Pea." Silence followed. Sierra looked at her mother with eyes wide in surprise. The word father had never fully held meaning in her life. "My dad?" Michelle's chest ached. "Yes. He wants to see you, if you're okay with that." An uncertain tension crossed Sierra's face, then tears welled in her eyes. "Mommy, are you mad at me? Did I do something wrong?" she whispered, as if the revelation was somehow her fault. Michelle drew her daughter into a fierce hug. No, baby. You did nothing wrong. This isn't your fault. Sometimes grown-ups get lost, and it takes time to find each other again." Sierra sniffled, pressing her cheek against Michelle's shoulder. "Will he like me?" she asked, voice trembling with both hope and fear. Michelle blinked back tears. "He'll love you, sweetheart. He already does, I think. He's missed so much of your life, and he wants to make things right." They stayed that way for a while, mother and daughter enveloped in a shared swirl of confusion, relief, and trepidation. Eventually, Sierra pulled back. "When can I see him?" Michelle brushed a curl from Sierra's face. "We can plan something soon, maybe a walk in the park, something calm and not scary." Sierra nodded, exhaling shakily. "Okay." That afternoon, Michelle dialed Joseph's number with trembling fingers, letting him know Sierra was ready to meet. They arranged a simple get-together in a public park near downtown Phoenix. Neutral ground, open air, a place that felt safe for both child and mother. Joseph's voice wavered with emotion, but he agreed at once, promising to be there whenever they wished. The next day, as the sun set low in a pastel sky, Michelle and Sierra walked hand in hand across a grassy field in Encanto Park. Families played frisbee and biked around the winding paths. Michelle's nerves jangled with each step. Sierra clutched her teddy bear, using it as an anchor for her swirling emotions. Near a quiet pond dotted with ducks, they spotted Joseph sitting on a bench. He wore casual clothes, jeans and a collared shirt, but his posture radiated tension. The moment he saw them, he stood. Michelle felt Sierra stiffen, the little girl's grip tightening on her mother's hand. "Hi," Joseph said quietly, eyes flicking from Michelle to Sierra and back. He seemed unsure whether to move forward or keep his distance. Finally, he sank to one knee so he wouldn't loom over the child. "You must be Sierra," he said, voice trembling with earnest warmth. "I'm Joseph. It's so nice to finally meet you." Sierra's expression was uncertain, but curiosity gleamed in her eyes. "Hi," she murmured. Then she glanced at Michelle, who offered a small nod of encouragement. Gathering her courage, Sierra held out her teddy bear. "This is Bailey," she whispered, as though introducing a friend to a stranger. Joseph smiled, his eyes brimming. "Bailey, it's wonderful to meet you both." He gently touched the teddy's tiny paw, as if greeting an old friend, then looked at Sierra again. "I've been waiting a long time for this." Sierra gave a hesitant smile. "Me too, I think," she said in a tiny voice, clearly overwhelmed by the swirl of feelings. Michelle watched the exchange with her heart in her throat. For 6 years, she'd shouldered the heavy secret of Sierra's father. Now she glimpsed the first steps of a fragile, precious bond forming. Joseph rose to his feet, meeting Michelle's gaze. A silent understanding passed between them. They were doing this for Sierra, forging a new path that might heal old wounds. In the days following that first meeting at Encanto Park, Joseph texted and called regularly, checking in about Sierra. He didn't push for too much time with her all at once, respecting Michelle's boundaries. With every hesitant step forward, Michelle felt a mix of relief, gratitude, and lingering wariness. After all, the man had once been a phantom in her life, disappearing without a word. But each new gesture, whether it was Joseph asking Sierra about her favorite animals or inviting them to lunch, convinced Michelle that perhaps he genuinely wanted to do right by his daughter now. Word reached Michelle that Joseph had officially filed for divorce from Clarissa. The news sent ripples through the Phoenix social scene, and gossip buzzed about what prompted the sudden split. Michelle tried not to dwell on it. She didn't want Sierra tangled in public scandals. Still, she couldn't deny a sliver of relief that Joseph was cutting ties to a loveless marriage. On a warm Saturday morning, Joseph invited Michelle and Sierra to visit a small children's museum downtown. Michelle agreed, sensing Sierra's growing eagerness to explore this new relationship with her father. The building's bright murals and playful exhibits provided the perfect backdrop for Sierra to relax and enjoy herself. They started in a room filled with imaginative playstations, a pretend grocery store, a miniature kitchen, an art corner. While Sierra tried on a chef's hat and whisked imaginary batter, Joseph watched with misty-eyed wonder. "She's amazing," he whispered to Michelle, standing by a table of pretend vegetables. "I had no idea being a father would feel like this." His voice quivered with awe. Michelle managed a soft smile. "You're good with her. She's warming up to you faster than I expected." Joseph let out a nervous laugh. "I'm terrified of making a mistake, but I'm learning. She loves telling me about her favorite cartoons and the pictures she's drawn." He paused, tenderness shadowing his expression. "I can't believe how much I've missed." Michelle nodded, swallowing her own regrets. "She's resilient," she said, watching Sierra hold up a plastic carrot. "But she's also sensitive. She's had only me for so long. Don't rush it." He met her gaze. "I won't." They spent hours exploring the exhibits, science displays, painting walls, puzzle corners. Sierra's laughter rose above the excited chatter of other children. Now and then, she'd run to Joseph, tugging his hand to show him something cool. He followed with unguarded joy, snapping photos on his phone like any proud parent. When lunchtime approached, they found a cozy table in the museum's cafe. Over sandwiches and fruit cups, Sierra chatted away about her favorite crayons and how Bailey the teddy bear needed a new outfit. Michelle and Joseph listened intently, exchanging occasional smiles that hinted at something deeper, a sense of unity forming where a void used to be. After they finished eating, Joseph cleared his throat. "I have something for you, Sierra," he said, rummaging in a small gift bag he'd stashed under the table. Sierra eyed him curiously. "What is it?" He pulled out a plush toy, a small phoenix bird, its feathers vividly colored in reds and golds. "I saw this and thought of you," Joseph said softly. "Phoenix is our city, and it's also a symbol of rebirth, new beginnings." Sierra gazed at the toy, her eyes lighting up. "It's pretty," she breathed, then hugged it tight. Her voice softened. "Thank you, Dad." The single word, Dad, hung in the air like a benediction. Michelle's chest constricted at the significance. Sierra said it shyly, but with a sincerity that showed she was accepting Joseph's place in her life. Joseph's eyes brimmed with tears, and he reached out to squeeze Sierra's hand. Michelle blinked back her own emotion. This was the moment she never thought she'd witness. For 6 long years, she'd carried the weight of regret and heartbreak, but now a small, brilliant light of healing had appeared. They left the museum in a hush of awe. Standing beside the car, Joseph turned to Michelle. "Thank you for giving me this chance," he murmured. "I don't expect forgiveness for all the lost time, but I'll spend whatever it takes to make things right from here forward." Michelle looked at him, tears threatening to fall. "I believe you," she said, surprising even herself with her honesty. "And maybe, together, we can figure out how to be the family Sierra deserves." At that, Sierra chimed in, hugging her new Phoenix plush. "Can we see each other tomorrow?" she asked, wide-eyed. Joseph crouched to her level. "We'll see each other often, I promise," he said, voice trembling with devotion. "I'll never leave you again if I can help it." Sierra's smile warmed Michelle's soul. For the first time in years, she felt an unfamiliar contentment wash over her. They drove home in companionable quiet, the threads of fear and doubt slowly unraveling, replaced by the tender beginnings of faith in a shared future. That evening, Michelle put Sierra to bed, reading an extra story as the child clutched her Phoenix toy. Afterward, Michelle sat alone on the couch, thinking about how drastically life had changed in mere weeks. She recalled how, at the wedding, she'd only wanted to earn money and stay invisible. Instead, she'd found the missing piece of Sierra's story and discovered that Joseph had never intended to abandon them. Though challenges lay ahead, she felt a quiet certainty. They were on a path to healing, a path that, for all its unknown turns, no longer led her through the darkness of secrecy and resentment. Instead, it carried her toward a future where love, though once lost, could rise anew, like the phoenix in Sierra's arms, warm, bright, and ready to soar. I hope you enjoyed today's story. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought of the story. See you in the next video.